Who paid you? Alvarez asked, crisp as a stapler. Kurt clamped his mouth. Silence is a man's favorite virtue when the truth might cost him the imagination of his uncle's respect. Morales sighed. He didn't look bored. He looked tired. We'll find out, he said. Because nobody pays cash anymore, unless they're the kind of idiot who buys starter fluid with a debit card. He cuffed Kurt without malice. You're lucky, he added, almost gently. You brought cans to a place with water in its bones. He let him up. Alvarez collected the cans like evidence and insult both. Ray looked at me in the dim and shook her head with such affection I wanted to cry and laugh at once. Boys and their cans, she said soft. Imagine if they built. We sat again when the night had its mute back. Cade didn't ask me to. Go home. I didn't ask him to promise morning. We didn't promise anything except the fact of showing up in 7 hours with the right tools. At dawn the fog pulled up its skirts and the world revealed itself again without makeup. We brewed coffee on a camp stove like teenagers pretending to be pioneers and laughed at ourselves because we didn't break the law to do it. Then we worked because that's how I like my dawns now. By noon, the roof sheathing was on. The house had an outline that the ocean could not pretend to ignore anymore. People pulled over and looked, and some smiled and some didn't, and one woman cried, and I didn't ask her why because I knew. At 2, Alvarez called. Clerk says your 30 days are your 30 days, she said. But there's rumor of a filing at the state level to freeze all new permits along the scenic corridor. You want to get out from under that. You accept the deed and get a foundation inspection and framing inspection in the next 48 hours. After that, you're in. They can scream, but they can't stop you. My stomach did a thing it does when the boat hits a swell just right. Drop, rise, decide. Okay, I said. Today, she echoed. I'll meet you at the clerk. Cade was on the ladder, nail gun on his hip, hat backward like a boy who forgets he's handsome. I told him. He climbed down slow, as if the ladder wanted a second to adjust to being part of a moment that mattered. Your call, he said. It's my name, I said. I'm tired of letting other people say it. He grinned quick, like a curtain blowing open. Then let's go say it in ink. The county clerk's office smelled like toner and the end of careers. Alvarez had the form, the polite, precise words that make private choices public record. Grantee hereby accepts deed. There was a line. My hand hovered above it longer than pride can comfortably look at. Before you sign, Alvarez said softly, know this. It will make everything worse with people who wanted to keep it from you, and it will make everything better with yourself. I breathed and thought of sawdust and Mercy's eyebrows, and Ray's boots and Mom's hand, and Finn's blisters, and the sea pretending to be indifferent, and the way the first sheet of subfluor sounded when my weight hit it. I signed. My name looked like it had been waiting for years at the end of that line, well rested, ready. The clerk stamped. The sound was wet, official. She smiled, not because of us, because she had been lonely for a victory that didn't come dressed. As loss, congratulations, she said. You're a homeowner of a house that's mostly air. Best kind, I said. Lots of room for weather. We stepped into the hallway. The lights hummed like bees bored with pollen. Ray texted a row of exclamation points that offended grammar. Dot sent a photo of her making a pie that looked like it had been told a secret and was keeping it poorly. Mercy replied with a gif I'm pretty sure she didn't know how to find. 3 weeks ago, my phone rang, not a number I recognized. Not unknown either. The screen said, Grange office. I answered because curiosity is a sin I may never beat. Hello? Miss Kincaid, Lowe said, like a man greeting a woman who just walked into his chessboard and flipped it. He didn't sound surprised. Bold. Correct, I said. You've complicated things, he said. Good, I said. I like things honest. He chuckled and then didn't. There's going to be equipment up at the spur this afternoon, he said. County trucks. Erosion. Control. Heavy rain predicted. Your prediction? The states, he said. You might want to be careful. The line clicked dead. Alvarez stared at my face. What? Erosion control, I said. County trucks. She made a noise only civil servants make when someone uses the word county to mean cover. Nobody sent me a notice, she said. She dialed, she listened. Nobody sent a notice, she said flatly. We're going now. We went. The road to the spur had more tire tracks than it knows how to wear comfortably. When we turned the last curve, the sight tore a sound from me I didn't recognize. A dozer sat at the top of the footpath, blade low, engine idling like a bored animal. Behind it, a dump truck. Men in vests stood around looking like they were standing around for a reason. A magnetic sign on the door minted legitimacy. Heritage Coastal Erosion Response. Not county, not state. A name invented yesterday that hoped to skate on the sheen of the words around it. Cade pulled in behind Alvarez. We got out. Ray's truck arrived on our tail, Mercy's van behind her. Finn's beat-up pickup fishtailing to a stop as if stopping itself was a vote. I walked up to the man with the clipboard. He had tan lines where his sunglasses lived. He had a wedding ring he fiddled with like it contained a better person. Who authorized this? I asked. He didn't meet my eyes. Emergency mitigation, he said. Private contractor. We got a call. From who? Alvarez asked, badge out now, voice clipped enough to cut zip ties. Which agency? He looked at the dozer the way boys look at dads when they're about to lie. The commission, he said. I think. Which one? She said. Spell it. He swallowed. I just have a paper. He held it up. Alvarez took it without touching his hand. She read. Her mouth went tighter than a brad nail. This is nothing, she said. This is a memo on letterhead U. Printed from a Google image search, he shrugged, miserable. We already started. I looked past him. The blade had cut into the shoulder above the platform, the sandy lip that grass used to keep from getting ideas. A 6-foot bite was missing. The next bite would roll toward our braces like a bad sermon. No, I said, and this time the word wasn't for men. It was for machines. It was for weather. It was for everything that thought momentum is its own morality. Cade stepped to my left, Ray to my right. Mercy behind me, the soft alchemy of her kitchen turned to steel by need. Alvarez in front, badge between her fingers like a pressure point. You roll that blade, Alvarez said very calmly to the operator. And I will personally name you in the suit that follows, and I will be bored while doing it, which is worse. For you then fury. The operator stared at her the way men stare at women who outlanguage their paycheck. He revved the engine because some men only have 2 moves. The blade crawled forward an inch. Then 2. Ray stepped forward. Cade grabbed her arm. She shook him off. We stand, she said. She walked to the edge of the platform, boots at the line, and looked up at the man on the dozer. I served communion to men who thought God liked their wallets, she said. I can stand in front of your toy. The blade inched. The ground vibrated a low purr at first, then a growl. Sand slid, remembering it used to be dune and had no loyalty to my nails. Mercy moved to stand beside Ray. Alvarez swore and pulled her phone and filmed. Because sometimes you document before you die. Finn stepped in without being told, jaw set. The kind of brave that is penance and hope at once. I walked forward and stood between Ray and the drop. The dozer's blade filled my vision like a new horizon I had not asked for. The operator's face looked smaller through the glass. The engine roared, then throttled down, then revved again. Like indecision had a motor. Cade's hand brushed my back once, then left, then came back and stayed. An anchor you forget you tied until wind tugs. And you're glad you did. Maris, he said, low, not a warning. A presence. The blade came another inch. I felt the tremor through my boots into my bones. And below us, down in the frame, the first nail complained, and then held, then complained again. The operator lifted one hand to his headset, listening to a voice we couldn't hear. He nodded at air. He set both hands again. His jaw clenched. The blade came toward my knees like a decision. I said no. I whispered. To steel in men and the part of myself that still thinks sacrifice and surrender are synonyms. The dozer did not care. It inched. The ground shivered. Alvarez shouted something legal that could have doubled as a hymn if you squinted. Ray lifted her chin. Mercy tightened her jaw. Cade's hand dug a fraction into my spine to tell me he was there, but wouldn't move me unless I asked. The blade kept coming, and I did not move. It means the day we prepared for arrived before the right people were ready. The voice shaped the air like warm hands over cold water. It wasn't synthesized kindness anymore. It was a cadence Mara knew from childhood, the way a directive became gentle without losing 1 ounce of authority. Listen closely, the system continued, still in her mother's tone. Row 5 contains a contingency kit labeled White Keys. This kit binds to a human custodian, not an office. Custodian of record, Keen, Mara Elodie. If I'm gone, you are the chain. Mara's breath didn't hitch. She made it not hitch. She pulled it in for 4 counts, out for 6, and filed the words where panic couldn't reach them. Vale broke the spell with the sound of skepticism finding oxygen. Who installed that voice print? Shaw's reply carried a careful neutrality that only partially masked shock. Director-level subroutine. We've never heard it. Today makes a lot of firsts. The suits watched the panel as if it might change its mind about physics. The taller one's expression said calculation. The shorter one said litigation. Neither had the look of a person who could open a bleeding airway with a pen. Mara trusted that kind in a crisis. She tolerated the rest. The screen rendered text beneath the greeting. Small and human-readable. An old-school UI built for people who'd be shaking when they read it. Row 5 access requires primary DNA, Keen, M, and secondary phrase token, Shaw. Glanced at her. Phrase token? Mara knew 3 phrases that belonged to her mother and only to her mother. One had been written on a sticky note above a crowded clinic station. Tape should be snug like you mean it, not angry like it means you. Another had been reserved for the day after bad days. We rest with purpose, not apology. The third wasn't. A phrase so much as a ritual, what her mother had said every time Mara left the house without a coat. She tried that one first. We are not made of sugar, she told the panel. A soft chime answered. The white ring around the door brightened. The vault accepted the memory as if the room itself had hearts, and each of them had recognized the same old song. Secondary phrase token verified, the system said. Row 5 unlocking. Vale's look left suspicion and found dread. If this is a trap buried under sentiment, then we will still step carefully, Shaw said. Proceed. The vault exhaled colder air. A half-height drawer slid out on whispering rails. Inside waited a matte black case the size of a small toolbox, seals intact, a handle molded to the idea of a human hand that might not be steady. White lettering across the top read, White KEY's Analog Recovery Kit, chain bind required. Mara did 3 small things with deliberate accuracy. She checked the seal integrity with her thumbnail. She read the serial aloud for the record. And she turned her head to the taller suit long enough to say, Sir, please keep your hands behind the threshold until the binder call completes. It'll arc if you bridge it. He blinked, offended by the suggestion he was a person who would touch something. I know not to, the case ticked. A tiny discharge popped the hairs along his wrist. He jerked, more startled than hurt. Mara slid a packet of cool burn gel from her thigh pocket and held it out without commentary. He took it and didn't thank her. Men rarely thanked a woman for saving them from their own reflexes while others were watching. Drop a, if you've ever had to be the calm one when everyone else was louder. Shaw nodded toward the case. Keen, she tore a fresh swab. The lancet felt trivial, too light for a ritual that kept getting heavier. She pricked, pressed, fed the swab to the bio slot. The room watched her blood become not just hers. Chain open, the vault said. Custodian bind acknowledged. Break seal to proceed. She peeled the seal in a single smooth strip. The lid lifted on gas struts that whispered like someone shushing a chapel. Inside, everything was unambiguously analog. Laminated city grid maps. Coded tag decks that looked like old motel keys. A manual in thick paper that had already decided to outlive a flood. A roll of microfilm labeled Crown Ledger. A weatherproof pen with a braided lanyard. A steel tin no bigger than her palm stamped. Arc-Kit. The manual's first page had 3 lines, black on white. A declaration rather than an explanation. When the system is lying, use things that can't. White keys are not a hack. They are a path around. You do not need permission to save. People. Mara swallowed. That last line had the sharp humor of the woman who'd raised her. Not a slogan, an ethic. Veil edged closer, tablet angled to record. What is Crown Ledger? A record of critical switch positions and their weakest accurate analogs. Mara said, scanning. Hydro gates, gas valves, traffic tree priorities, hospital isolation corridors. If software is compromised, Crown tells you how to replicate essential behavior by hand. 2-person verification, paper signatures, physical locks. It's ugly and trustworthy. Shaw's focus narrowed to the roll of microfilm. You know how to read that? She nodded. We have a reader in archives. Or we photograph against a lightbox and invert. It's slow. Do it slow if slow is sure, Shaw said. Veil, coordinate, King, prioritize. Mara ran her finger down the manual's triage table. The city felt like a patient bleeding in multiple places while also trying to hide a fracture. Out of shame. Traffic manual override to clear medical corridors. Then gas line failsafes near 5 and Dorsey. Then, the room's intercom coughed. Ops pushed through on Shaw's channel, voice tight. Colt, Mercy's NICU reports inconsistent temperature readings. HVAC shows normal at the panel. Babies are cold. Nurses are swearing, which I take as proof. Shaw's jaw set. Copy, support? Mara had the answer before fear could offer opinions. Legacy HVAC overlay is in white keys. Row 5 has a blue tag deck for medical priority air. We can lock NICU airflow manually with dampers if we get the map. She found the deck labeled IR Medical. The tags were thick plastic, each, with a code and a line drawing. Not ornamental, operational. She tossed the NICU card to Shaw. Send a runner to the hospital with this deck and a tech who can read duct numbers upside down. Tell them to carry a headlamp and a pencil. Tell. Then they're not allowed to get lost. He caught the deck with the competence of a man who never fumbled when someone else's lungs were the stakes. On it. He looked at Veil. You escort. Veil didn't object. That was new. He took the deck, then paused, looking at Mara. As if the day had nearly convinced him she saw something he didn't. What about your interview? It can wait, Shaw said. The babies can't. Veil left with the suits gone suddenly purposeful. The corridors swallowed their footsteps and returned to being a held breath. Mara selected the Arc-Kit tin. Inside lay a folded mylar pouch, 2 paper seals with microprinting, a small hand-cranked generator that clipped onto a key blank, and a slip of paper that looked like an ordinary sticker until you examined the fiber microdots braided into. The Pulp.Arc-Kit, analog Reiki components, use when a primary key is suspect or has been observed by hostile actors. Hostile actors. Her eyes flicked to the ceiling where a camera watched with a loyalty that could be borrowed by anybody who knew where to pry. Ops, she said into Shaw's unused headset, keeping her tone crisp. When Vale's team bagged devices in Bay 7, did they find an RF capture unit tuned to the vault's bio-channel frequencies? A beat. Affirmative, Op said. Ceiling panel. Like a barnacle, we've handed it to forensics. Her mouth tasted metallic. Then assume the hostile actor did not just want our directory. Assume they were watching the binder exchanges. We will work as if someone is counting my drops. Shaw absorbed this with a stillness that resembled grief. And if they are, then they know I'm the chain, she said. They already know, Shaw. That LED died angry. He nodded once. A quiet oath. What's next? The gas line at 5 and Dorsey. She flipped Crown Ledger to the marks for that grid. The microfilm index referenced a paper mirror in the kit, a redundancy that made her want to hug the person who'd insisted. She laid the paper map flat, weighted corners with laminated tags. The remote trigger thinks it's in maintenance. Crown says there's a manual arm on the foam tanks, plus a choke on the supply, that can be closed with a bar and 2 people who don't mind blisters. She traced pathways with the capped pen, narrating for Shaw and the room. We displace traffic with manual priority. We drop foam by hand. We choke the supply as backup. We do it in that order to keep the fumes down while we move the rigs. You prefer old school, Shaw said. I prefer what's real, she said, then realized how it sounded and softened it. What's verify by touch? Ops broke in again. Cult, Utilities is screaming in all caps. The hydro plant reports the old wheels fighting them. It wants to increase flow past the safe band. Someone is sending ghost commands to the governor. Mara's finger found the hydro page before she knew she'd done it. Crown lists a physical gate lockout. 2 padlocks, 2 keys. One is in White Keys row 5, bin 5. The other is in Utilities' own vault. Shaw's glance was the question. Mara was already moving. I'll get ours. Call Utilities. Tell them to meet at the gate housing with their key and a person. Wearing gloves that fit. She re-entered the vault's cool, past row 2's honest rattles and row 3's predictable waits to row 5's quiet authority. The second bin came free with a tactile click. Inside lay 2 ancient-looking brass keys the size of bedtime stories. She checked the tag numbers, checked the ledger numbers, double-checked the assumption that she hadn't just made up certainty. Because she needed it. 2-person, 2-lock, she said, returning to the door. Force the gate into manual safe band. It can't interpret a handwritten note. Shaw took 1 key. I'll send a team. I'll send 2, Mara said. We no longer move alone when moving together makes failure less likely. He gave her a look that said worth stealing and left to bark orders written in verbs. For 2 minutes, the vault room belonged only to Mara and the machines. The panel's greeting still glowed. Hello, Mara, as if the building had written her name. On a lunch she hadn't ordered. The hum of HVAC had a new texture. Now that she knew babies might be cold because software had decided math was optional, she cleaned the lancet tip with alcohol, a small refusal to be sloppy just because the sun had set. She repacked the Arca kit, so a stranger with decent hands would find it in a hurry. She labeled the empty seal pouch with the time. She straightened the trauma shears in the kit to 45 degrees. Rituals were scaffolding. Scaffolding held weight when Brick decided to remember gravity. Footsteps returned. Veils. He had ditched 1 suit at Mercy and the other at the Hydro Rendezvous. His hair looked like a man who'd put his hand in it on purpose. He stopped. Just shy of the threshold. They closed the NICU dampers, he said. The head nurse said tell the calm one thanks, a beat. Hydro is en route to the locks. Good, Mara said. She made the words steady so it wouldn't trigger any of the alarms living in his face. We need to plan for what happens when the hostile actor realizes Crown is in play. They've been pushing software to throw us at screens. Crown drags us back to metal. They'll try to pull us forward again. Vale lifted the tablet but didn't look at it. Something had shifted behind his eyes, like a light that used to be off during daytime and on at night had tried a new schedule. Internal security found a third device in a junction box outside ops. It was piggybacking on power noise to signal. Someone in this building had patience. Patience is a tool, she said. The wrong hands use it better than the loud ones. He studied her. Why did the vault know your nickname? Because my mother whispered it, she said. Because she worked here once, apparently. Because a building that talks like her is slightly less terrible than a building that would talk like you. It was a joke. He smiled like a man who had yet to remember how. The smile died fast, but not because of offense. Because of the intercom. Colt, Ops said, and the use of Shaw's first name meant the map had decided to change shape. We have a rolling set of false evacuations. Across 3 hospitals, 2 schools, and the courthouse. The unknown actor is using the alert system to pull people into the streets. Also hearing unconfirmed reports of drones near traffic intersections hovering. Intersections they can jam, Mara said. They want choke points, not just confusion. She tapped the manual. Crown says we can set manual rotation clocks at critical lights. It's crude, but it starves the choke points. We need bodies at corner controllers with watches and whistles. Whistles? Vale said. Whistles cut through 3 kinds of panic faster than radios and don't depend on a battery. He searched her face for irony. He didn't find any. We have 160 people. And a city, she said. We'll borrow from people who already like standing where cars go. She called Opus again. Dispatch community response volunteers to major intersections and hand them the manual cadence. Too short, long. Teach them the whistle for bus lane. Get the school crossing guards on a party line and make them captains. Vale watched, eyes flicking between her hands and the text. You shouldn't be good at this. Shouldn't, she said softly, remembering a much smaller room and a much warmer lamp, is a useless word when a baby is cold. He didn't reply. The door behind him opened. The director entered with night on his suit and rotors in his hair. He was handsome in the way of men who have been told the truth won't say no to them. The suits reconstituted behind him, fresh from different errands. He stopped when he saw Mara at the vault. The pause would have looked like calculation to anyone else. To Mara, it looked like a person taking a photograph they planned to file and mislabel on purpose. Miss Keene, he said, smile precise. Step away from the vault. Shaw returned in the same breath, damp air clinging to his jacket. He took in the tableau in a fast scan. Director. We've moved on contingency. 2. The white keys are in play. We've suppressed 3 false evacuations. Hydro is locking. The director didn't look at Shaw. He looked only at the case and at the woman whose blood lived in the record. You do not have authority to operate Row 5. The vault gave it, Shaw said. Under your own subroutine, sir. Keene. A small suspend of expression crossed the director's face, the microsecond version of surprise. Then he smiled wider, carefully. A contingency does not preempt protocol. Protocol says internal security verifies anomalous credentials before any further binding. He turned to Vale, as if to hand him an award wrapped around a job. Mr. Vale, secure Miss Keene. We will proceed without her. Shaw's mouth opened. He closed it. Mara did neither. She picked up the Arctic Kit tin and shut it with a soft click that somehow felt like a door slamming across a river. Director, she said, careful around the angles of the word. The hostile actor has been capturing our binder exchanges. You can take me out of this room, but you can't take me out of the chain you've already published. His smile cooled a degree. That is above your pay grade. So are cold babies, but here we are. Vale's eyes moved between their faces like a metronome, unwilling to pick a tempo. He didn't reach for her. He didn't move at all. He didn't have to. The 2 new suits did. They were textbook hands open, voices patient, angles designed. To make a person choose to comply because fighting would waste breath needed elsewhere. Mara considered compliance not as surrender, but as resource management. The vault spoke again before she could make the math. "Hello, Director," it said, warm like a trap at room temperature. "Secondary authorization requested. Please provide." "Phrase token." He blinked. "What token?" "Secondary phrase token," the system said in her mother's cadence. "Director-level access requires recognition of the custodian's maternal voice." The room didn't breathe. The director's smile had two options. It chose the wrong one. "Override," he said. "Administration." "Override denied," the vault said. "Chainbind in effect." Shaw's voice slowed, the way a man speaks when the floor has told him a new story about gravity. "Sir." The director turned that smile onto her like he'd used it on a senator and a donor and a weatherwoman and a mirror. It did nothing to the nerves in her forearms or the steadiness in her wrists. "Ms. Keene, give me the phrase." Mara did not. Look at Vale because she already knew what his face would tell her, too much and too little. She didn't look at Shaw because his face would try to fold her into safety. She looked at the case and then at the panel that had decided to let her mother speak again. She had always believed in redundancy. Redundancy was love with a screwdriver. Drop a... If your mother ever taught you a line that could open a door when nothing else would. She turned to the director and said nothing. The intercom stabbed. Ops didn't apologize. Ops never did when the news carried teeth. "Colt, utilities reports they can't find the second key. Their vault says it was signed out last week by..." "Internal, audio garbles here. We're blind at the gate." Shaw's gaze asked her a question that had no good answer. "We have one key," he said. "We need two." Mara's eyes dropped to the RCKIT. There was a reason the tin came with a micro-generator and a blank. Analog Reiki was not a metaphor. It was a theft with ethics. "If a key is missing," she said, more to herself than to the room, "we make a temporary twin and close the gate. To safe band, then destroy the twin after signatures." The director stepped forward, voice soft as cotton shoved into a crack. "You will not do that." Mara looked at him and found the place inside herself that did not bruise anymore when men made gentle sound like gravity. "And you will not stop me, sir." Shaw took a breath that set the room's metronome. "Miss Keene, do it." "Vale, you'll..." "Go. Director, lodge your protest on a channel that isn't drowning." The director's hand lifted in a shape that might have been a signal once. The suits read it as permission to wait. He smiled again, and this time it reached none of the places it should. "Very well. We'll address your insubordination when the city is not on fire." Mara stepped into motion before the sentence finished. She snapped the micro-generator onto the blank, cranked until the indicator turned from thinking to ready, pressed the blank into the duplication nest with the surviving key as master, and felt the rhythm through her fingertips like a heartbeat. Measured by teeth. It took longer than electronics would have allowed. It also worked. She held the twin up to the panel's light. The cut was ugly and precise, exactly what honesty looks like when it's urgent. "Vale," she said, tossing him the generated twin. "Go. Two-person verification at the gate, close to safe band. Write it down with your real handwriting." He caught it with a reflex that said he'd been a good boy once for a father who never noticed. He hesitated. He looked at the director. He looked at Shaw. He looked at her. He went. The room exhaled Mara, Shaw, the vault, the building. The director did not. He watched Mara with the patience of a person who mistook endurance for wisdom. The panel flickered. New text crawled across the bottom. "Alert. Secure directory. Breach second vector. Source. Ops auxiliary terminal. Shaw." Swore the kind of concise word good men save for moments that deserve it. They pivoted. Mara slid into the auxiliary terminal before fear could introduce itself again. "They're using a credential we revoked. That means they're replaying old handshakes. Her fingers mapped the subnet in muscle memory. I can seed the directory with a Honey account and let them promote to a sandbox we can watch without letting them touch live permissions. Shaw said nothing because saying nothing sometimes lets a person do a thing faster. She did it. The spike veered into a walled garden she named Ghost's Nursery and locked behind them. The log filled with their impatience, line after angry line. She captured the hardware signature and appended it to a list she instructed the building to silently distrust. It would buy them minutes, maybe hours. Possibly enough. Her hands stilled. Her breath did not. The vault's panel softened into a different light, one made for a different kind of instruction. Hello again, Mary, her mother's voice said, every vowel a note from a kitchen that hadn't existed in years. If the director is in the room, and if he asks for what is behind row 5, you will tell him this. He already has it. He had it the day he decided a human was an obstacle and not an asset. Shaw's eyes moved to the director without asking for permission. The director's smile didn't move. The suits were very still, the stillness of men who listen for a different boss behind walls. Mura's throat tightened. She kept her voice level. What is behind row 5? Proof, the voice said, and a ledger of failures, and a list of people who will take your calm and call it insolence. Use it only when you cannot save a life without it. Silence writhed like a live thing under the table. Ops came back, breathless through a wire. Gate locked, Vale reported. Safe banned, foam deployed. Corner captains are blowing whistles like a parade. It's working. He paused, and when he spoke again, there was something new in it, an unpracticed respect, or maybe just the absence of contempt. What's next? Mara looked at the director and at Shaw and at the vault that had decided it remembered a nickname only one woman had used without making it smaller. We opened the envelope with my name, she said. She reached for the slim paper packet nested between the manuals, sealed with wax that had not cracked yet, because someone with careful hands had saved it like a life. Her fingers paused because rituals mattered most right before you broke them. Shaw's voice was quiet and therefore loud. You sure? No, she said. But the hostile actor's second vector is inside ops. The director can't give a phrase he doesn't have. And my mother didn't write to me because she believed in my restraint. She broke the seal. Inside was a letter written in blue ink that had known a human hand. The first line was a greeting she hadn't seen on paper since the last time a woman with sleep in her eyes had tucked her into a night that felt safe because the roof didn't leak and the dogs down the block weren't fighting. Mary, if you're reading this, breathe first. She did. Then the second line took the breath back. The director will offer you a choice he will call cooperation. He will say your bind is dangerous and that the city needs the vault more than it needs you. He will ask you to unbind the chain and assign it to his office. Do not. He will tell you, I was wrong to insist a person be the failsafe. He will say systems are safer than daughters. He is not wrong about systems. He is wrong about this daughter. Her hands did not shake. It would be safe later. The letter continued in a neat hand that had written 1,000 discharge notes and 5 terrible goodbyes. Row 5, lower compartment, holds the catalyst. It will let you generate single-use keys that will expire at your command instead of somersault into a criminal's pocket. It draws from your binder and no one else's. It is the only way to Reiki a city under a director who measures risk in donors. Use it if and only if internal is compromised. Shaw read her face, because a good operator learns to read a map that isn't on paper. Is internal compromised? She looked at Vale's last text echoing in the log. She looked at the second vector inside ops. She looked at the director, who was already composing the sentence he would lead tomorrow's meeting with. We're about to find out, she said, and lifted the false bottom of row 5 with a fingertip. Beneath lay a device the size of a paperback. Brushed metal, one port, one button. A strip of tape across it said, "Read before touch," in handwriting that had scolded better people than any of them. She read the insert aloud to make the room complicit. Catalyst. Generates ephemeral analog key maps using a blend of custodian, DNA hash and time-coded phrase tokens. Consumable. Non-replayable. If stolen, useless. If destroyed, not replaceable. Instructions: feed phrase, feed blood, turn the crank like you mean it. The director stepped forward as if manners would get him in front of physics. That device belongs to Helios. Mara didn't look up. So do I. She set the device on the threshold where the binder would read the chain. She pricked again, pressed again, found the rhythm again. The device woke with a small hum that sounded like work when work is honest. Phrase, the vault said, very politely. Mara closed her eyes and pulled up the sentence that had lived above. A clinic sync on nights when it was post-midnight, and nobody had eaten and somebody had cried. We rest with purpose. Not apology, she said. The catalyst accepted the old truth and began to turn drip and word into a temporary future. The building's lights dimmed a fraction, like a large animal shifting its weight from the intercom. A shout that wasn't language. Then a cutter of sentences. Ops breach O terminal. Shaw moved. The suits moved. The director did not. Mara looked up in time to see a silhouette in the glass of the far door cap low, hoodie up. A third man whose mediocrity was a strategy lift. Something that wasn't a gun and was worse. The object in his hand was a jammer with a temper and a mouthful of other people's plans. He lifted it toward the catalyst. Mara's hand found the only thing in reach that could change the math-laminated tag with metal corners, and threw it. The tag hit the jammer mid-arc. The device clipped. The door frame and cracked open like a bad idea. The room's lights lurched. The vault hissed. And the catalyst's hum jumped a register as if deciding on which of three futures to take personally. The director flinched. The suits went for the door. Shaw went for Mara, and the vault took a breath that had a shape. Then the world wrote a new rule. The catalyst spat out a strip of fiber paper, blistering with microdots and an address block that didn't belong to any grid she'd seen. It landed in her palm like a live wire wearing a map. Ephemeral key map generated. The system said in her mother's voice that had learned how to be calm inside a burning room. Single use. 45 minutes. Custodian only. Apply to the door labeled Orpheus. There was no door in the vault labeled Orpheus. Not yet. So they made one. Not a door anyone could see. At least not until the room agreed with the paper. Mara held the fiber strip like a fuse that wanted a place to burn. The microdots glittered under the vault's cool light. An impossible constellation. Arranged by a hand that had believed in maps when everybody else believed in dashboards. She slid a stainless tray under the strip, flicked her phone's flashlight on, and made a quick, tidy light box with an alcohol wipe wrapper and a folded tourniquet packaging. Improvise didn't have to mean ugly. Read it, Shaw said, keeping his voice low, like a man whispering to a dog stuck under a fence. She angled the light. The dots resolved into lines, the lines into measurements, the measurements into obligations. 14 centimeters from the lower right of the threshold. Frame, she murmured. There's a seam you can't see unless you want to. 12 more on the vertical. 2 magnetic catches. Orpheus isn't a door. It's a consent. The director hovered just outside usefulness. This is irresponsible. Which part? Mara said, already kneeling. The part where you're building has a heart, or the part where you didn't know it? She ran her fingertips along metal that had been sanded until its memory forgot it was 2 pieces. Her nails found nothing. Her skin found a temperature shift thinner than a lie. She pulled a slim feeler gauge from the RCKIT, the kind you use when a misbehaving carburetor insists you be specific, and fed it into absence. The gauge kissed a magnet and stopped. She pressed the catalyst's edge against the frame, aligned. its small teeth with the microdots drawn on the strip, and turned the crank twice. A muted click passed through the metal like a second heartbeat, learning the rhythm of the first. "Apply," the vault said, as if it had waited years to be asked. Politely, Mara held the fiber strip flat against the frame. The paper warmed under her fingers. The dot sang back to a sensor that had been dormant so long it had probably written a sonnet about sleep. Something behind the panel exhaled. The scene gave up 1 millimeter of honesty. Vale wasn't there to see it. He was still at the hydrolocks, standing in 2 people's worth of decision and remembering to write his name in a box that demanded legibility. But she felt his absence like a weight. The day had trained her to root her balance to the floor. Drop a if you've ever had to find the thing. That's there only when you decide it is. She pried gently, no heroics. The panel slid back on a rail that resented its retirement. Being interrupted. Cold air kissed her knuckles. Behind the seam, a narrow inner door waited, unpainted, unlabeled, the kind of door a person hides when they love an idea more than they trust people. The catalyst in her palm hummed. The strip's ink blinked out like a starfield unplugged by dawn. Ephemeral meant ephemeral. 42 minutes, she said, habitually putting numbers where fear wanted adjectives. That's our shelf life. The director stepped forward and met the invisible line written across the threshold between raw curiosity and civilized interdiction. He stopped because even the kind of man who believed hallways existed for him could still feel a tripwire under his shoes. "Miss Keene," he said, voice carefully tired, "you are operating systems you do not understand." She kept her reply. "Clean. I'm operating systems that understand me." Shaw nodded. "Once a salute you give the conditions, not the person. Proceed." Mara pressed her fingertip to the small bio slot inside the new frame. The lancet had become a metronome. Pierce, press, swab, feed. The vault made a sound that wasn't quite a chime and wasn't quite a sigh. "Custodian recognized," it said. "Orpheus path available." The inner door drew inward just enough to reveal a blackness that wasn't dark so much as empty of assumptions. A breath of very cold, very dry air slid out, clean as a winter morning that had never met exhaust. Shaw leaned, then caught himself as if listening to a ghost give advice about traps. "We don't go blind." He flicked a micro headlamp from his pocket and clipped it to the rim of his ear. The beam cut a stripe into the void. Metal, labels, the grammar of restraint. Mara took 1 step in and immediately stepped sideways so the suits behind her couldn't claim she'd blocked them out. She read signs she couldn't see by how the air moved around edges. A ladder descended to a platform. A handrail had been installed by someone who'd loved OSHA like a cousin. 3 meters down, she said. "Platform. If I pass out, catch me silently and lie about why." Shaw snorted 1 exhale of camaraderie offered on consignment. He followed, his weight translating into careful thuds. The suits stayed at the top like wolves called to a lake. The director stood with his hands in his pockets, because pockets were a stage direction dot at the platform. The headlamp found a small second panel. No card reader, no iris scanner. Just a small injection of low relief on brushed metal, a circle bisected by a line, and below it, a single word stamped so gently, the letters refused to shout. "Orpheus." Mara, single quotes, S-throat, made a shape that wasn't a sound. She placed the catalyst against a recess that had waited for it, the way a socket waits for a key if the key gets to choose whether to grow old. The device's hum found a new timbre. "Phrase," the vault said, her mother inside the syllables like a hand inside a glove. Mara looked at Shaw. He didn't ask. He waited. Respect could be shaped like silence. She skimmed her inventory of inherited lines and found the one that had always felt like a weapon and a lullaby at once. "Calm makes edges sharp," she said, speaking her father into a room he would have hated for all the right reasons. The device accepted the calibration of a dead man's pedagogy. A soft, deep click like a lock that had been practicing alone for years rolled through the panel. Metal slid. The Orpheus door opened inward to a space the size of a walk-in closet that had taken vows. The air had that museum chill meant to keep old paper from becoming regret. Shelves ran elbow height around 3 walls. Each shelf held boxes the color of whetstone, numbered in a hand that cared about legibility, because the person who'd write the number knew someone in the future would be shaking. In the center, on a plinth bolted to the floor, lay a thin case with a lock that looked like no lock Mara had ever met, neither warded nor pin and tumbler nor electronic. Something crossbred from a safe and a music boxed out Shaw drew a breath that ended in a fathomless word. Careful. I'm going to be obnoxiously careful, Mara said, and set down the catalyst on the plinth's edge like a chalice. She circled the room once with her fingertips, reading the layout by touch and humidity. Her hand came away smelling faintly of silica gel and old ink. She checked the floor bolts out of habit. Tight, aligned. The hand that had done the work had believed in setting torque, not guessing it. Drop us if someone you lost still helps you do the impossible by how they taught you to do the simple. The box's labels were plain until they weren't. Crown supplement, ledger, internal, hospital manual overrides, traffic analog trees, and then, in a script that had somehow learned to hide rebellion by never rising above a line, director. Audit sealed. Custodian plus Fed observer only. Shaw saw it when she did. He didn't reach for it. He didn't look at the suits. He looked at the thin case on the plinth. Open that, he said softly. Mara knelt. The lock had a keyway that wasn't. A keyway. A slot that wasn't a slot. A pair of holes that pretended to be for screws. The catalyst had a lateral extension she hadn't noticed before because the day wasn't done being smug about secrets. She slid the tip in, rotated until a hum found a friend, and felt the mechanism yield. The lid lifted. Inside lay a small stack of sterile bags, each containing a fragile square of something that looked like onion skin, grew up and took an engineering degree. An insert in her mother's handwriting sat on top. Catalyst keys. Each is one time, one lock. Each is yours until time says otherwise. Mar, if internal falls, you'll need to open the audit without unbinding the chain. You don't owe them your throat to prove you're not a wolf. Her mouth tasted like a coin. She swallowed and kept her hands honest. To her left, a wall phone she hadn't seen lit. A small amber grain of attention. It rang once, then again, then settled into a steady glow like a heartbeat, deciding not to race anyone. She lifted the receiver. Orpheus. Ops came through, close to breathless. Keen Shaw, you both there? We are, Shaw said over her shoulder. We've contained the auxiliary terminal. The hoodie had a partner in dispatch. We're scrubbing. But the voice did the thing good voices do when bad news makes them choose speed over theatrics. Someone just lit up the outer fence with a false fire signal and tripped our auto open on the service gate. We got a convoy outside that shouldn't know our gate code. They do. Shaw's jaw tightened until it made a quiet sound. How many? 3 vans, blacked out, plates no one will vouch for. The director, above on the platform, called down with the cheer of a man announcing whether he could walk between. It's a contractor drill. Stand down. Shaw raised the receiver, covering it with his palm. His eyes on the director said he was done with being pretty. Sir, I didn't schedule a drill. The director's smile kept his teeth to himself. I did. Yesterday, you were in a meeting. Shaw didn't say the meeting had been canceled. He didn't say the calendar entry had never been logged. He didn't say the man had lied the day he chose this tie. He looked at Mara. Mara looked at the catalyst's clock. 38 minutes. If Orpheus has anything that keeps vans from learning our names, it's in here. She moved to the shelf marked ledger, internal, and lifted a box as carefully as if it contained someone else's childhood. Inside, Card decks like the traffic ones, only these carried names with tags rolls, grant trails, contract chains, and a thin tether of dates. The director knelt at the platform's edge as if participating might rewrite his part in the scene. "Miss Keene, close Orpheus, this is outside chain." She ignored him. She took a card labeled Service Gates and read, "Manual counter override located in Utility Tunnel C, 15 meters from the south fence, behind a panel labeled Irrigation Timers, padlock, brass, #43. There's a manual counter override," she said, already returning the box to its exact imprint. "If a false open is triggered, the counter clocks out. We reset it, and the gate forgets it panicked." Shaw's phone buzzed. "Vale," he answered, pinching speaker toward his shoulder. "Status. Hydro's locked and singing in the safe." "Banned," Vale said. "Foam's down. Traffic's arguing less. Babies are warm. I can be back in 8. Make it 6, Shaw said. "Bring a pry bar and a conscience. We've got vans at the south gate." Vale hesitated, then went harder. "On it." Mara slid back to the plinth and opened the case containing the Onion Skin Squares catalyst keys. She took one out, held it up to the headlamp, watched the dots write a story only a scanner could read. "We can lock the south gate from here. If the old air-gapped relay still listens to truth," she said. "But the director's drill will give us a false supervisor key in 10 minutes. We need to beat it." The director made a small motion, and one of the suits moved to the platform as if a manners class had taught him how to be neutral while taking something. Shaw stepped between them without baring teeth. Not today. The suit did a math problem he didn't like and decided to pass. Mara fed the onion skin into a slot behind the Orpheus panel that had gone to some trouble to look like a seam until now. The vault drank the story. The building made a judgment call. "Counter override ready," it said in her mother's tone, like good news told with the gravity it deserved. "Custodian, confirm." "Confirm," Mara said, and felt her name. Become a bolt sliding home inside a place no one had let her belong to until not belonging became expensive. The intercom popped. Ops again, louder, nearer. "South Gate just tried to crush a van," the voice said, wild with the joy that comes when your systems punish liars. "They pulled back. We got a stalemate." "Keep it," Shaw said. "Vale's en route." "Drop." "A, if you've ever shut a door on someone who said they owned your house." "Internal," Ops added, lower. "We pulled the dispatch partner. He had a second badge in his boot, not ours." Mara closed her eyes for one breath. Her mother's. Letter said use catalyst if and only if internal is compromised. It didn't say what to do about a director who used drills like camouflage. She opened the box, labeled Director Audit sealed. Her hands didn't shake. She wished they would. Later would be polite and run a shiver down her arms when it was. Frida. Shaw stood with her, shoulders turned so the suits couldn't read. "You sure?" "No," she said, and opened it. Inside, a ledger bound in buckram, tabs bristling like determined grass. A preface, unsigned. That sounded like her mother when her mother had decided a small bad habit needed to die kindly and quickly. "If you are reading this, remember, evidence is a public service." Rage is private. Mara turned to the tab labeled Contracts Emergency. Supply, names, dates, signatures that looked like they'd been taught to behave on checks. A chain of denials written longhand by people who thought, "This never happened." Sounded credible when written on letterhead. She skimmed until the pattern bit. The same vendor listed under 3 different shells. The same account number in the fine print. A familiar unreliability attached to the service gate code update. She pushed the ledger toward Shaw. He read fast, one of his unadvertised talents. His mouth flattened, then kept going until it discovered an anatomy that allowed for more anger without more volume. Above, the director shifted his weight. It made a sound like rain starting. "You are wasting time." Mara slid the ledger back into the box and closed it. No, we're budgeting it. The Orpheus phone ticked, then rang once. She lifted it. Orpheus. Keen, some of those vans just offloaded, Vale said. He was running. She could hear the world turning under his feet. Guys with bolt cutters and better cardio than brains, I'm 30 seconds out. You want them spooked or stopped. Stopped without shooting, unless they write you a thesis about why they insist, she said. They're carrying the wrong map. She hung up because you hang up when people you can't protect by being there need to use the air, and turned to the shelves again. Her fingers found a kit whose label made her grin with a kind of savage gratitude. Whistles, Captain. She ripped it open, shoved 2 into Shaw's hand, and clipped 1 to her collar. You're not going to whistle at them, the director said. Incredulous. Mara met his eyes and gave him the lesson her mother had given angry men in waiting rooms who thought volume treated pain. Whistles organize better than fear. Shaw moved for the ladder. Stay here, he told the suits, not because he thought they would, but because giving orders clarifies loyalties. The room flexed a change in pressure you feel in your gums. The vault's lights dimmed a fraction. The catalyst clock ticked. Small and loud. Mara turned to the catalyst keys and pulled 2 more onion skins. She slid them into a pocket she'd sewn into the inside of her vest months ago, because zipper failure on cheap pockets had a way of picking bad days. The director glanced around as if a cameraman might emerge to rescue his angle. Miss Keen, you are fired. She looked up at him the way a medic looks at a patient who just fired a nurse for bringing the wrong size gloves while the room was bleeding. No, sir, she said. I'm busy. He stepped back, not offended, not even surprised. Cataloging. She put him on a shelf. She had labeled in pencil for now and promised herself she'd choose a pen later. Shaw's footsteps vanished down the ladder. A half-second later, the building adopted a new tone. The difference between a room breathing because it wants to and a room breathing because it has to. The intercom spat static, then an orderly voice that had decided it was done apologizing. Ops to Orpheus, we have motion on the east loading bays. Drones on the overhangs. Somebody got tired of screens and brought toys. Mara slid 1 more catalyst key into the panel and whispered to the building like she'd whisper to an infant who had nothing left for adult reason. Hear me. Lock the East Bay overheads to manual. Pull their power. If manual override is attempted from outside, shout. The vault nodded in the language of relays. Done, she exhaled. Spent 1 of her 2 allowed luxuries, a long blink, and reached for the box. Labeled hospital manual overrides to reinforce whatever had been jury-rigged with NICU. She tucked a second copy of the medical AirTag deck into a pouch and labeled it with her initials and the time. Details would save her conscience later. Something small and sharp clicked behind her. The Orpheus door's lock shifted. She turned. A hand well-groomed, too clean for this place, rested lightly on the edge of the panel. The shorter suit stood impossibly inside where he had not been, eyes intent, calm as a borrowed lake. He had bypassed Shaw's order by ignoring what orders are agreements between people who trust each other. He didn't reach for her. He reached for the thin case on the plinth. Mara moved faster than someone with her build gets credit for. She slid between his hand and the case, hip-checked him out of the room's conditional hospitality, and made him hit the jam with enough honesty to learn a boundary. His expression didn't change. Ma'am, this is federal property. Then you know how to fill out forms, she said, and reclosed the Orpheus panel a fraction, making the room. Choose her again. He gauged the narrow doorway and the way her shoulders made a door out of a person. He exhaled and stepped back with the intentional courtesy of a man who wanted to keep 6 future options. Hit save if you're following this, the air said to nobody, and to an audience that would turn this into someone's favorite midnight. And then the world tried again to be loud, a report from outside metal, meeting metal in a conversation that replaced verbs with heat. The intercom croaked. Vale's breath and a whistle's bark tangled. Gate secured, he said. Vans retreating to the road. We got plates and a lot of hurt feelings. East Bay drones are down. Someone tried to jump the overheads. They got a face full of darkness. Good, Mara said, and was about to say keep 3 good men on the south fence and drink water when the vault's panel interrupted with a tone that made her flex every muscle. She'd trained not to flinch. Alert. Oxy-suppression armed. Vault C countdown. 120 seconds. Halon. Double quotes. Who armed it? She said, already moving for the shelf labeled respiratory. Who gave it a reason? The panel did not volunteer shame. It offered procedure, authorization, director-level flag. Rationale, fire simulation, leak unknown. Mara's head filled with photographs of rooms that had forgotten how to contain flame and the dear bodies that learned to obey Halon because oxygen had become someone else's ambition. She yanked a bundle of compact rebreathers from a bag, caught Shaw with a shout, and turned to the suits. You get one if you stop pretending you don't know what it does, she said. You say thank you by shutting up for 30 seconds. The taller suit took his, eyes smoothing into the expression of a person who always knew which end of a life raft to hold. The shorter one hesitated a beat too long and then accepted fate. She tossed one up the ladder toward the director. Sir, if you tell me that Halon is a drill, I will tell you to breathe through this anyway. He didn't argue. He caught it. Because instinct is older than arrogance. Shaw hit the platform, sweat making a new map on his collar. Vale slid in behind him, a scrape across his knuckles. A nick across pride that would scar into something he might eventually like. Halon. Shaw said. Halon, Mara answered. 2 minutes. They moved like a small, unpopular religion fast, precise, convinced. She slapped a mask to Vale's chest. He caught it, glanced at the director, glanced at her, and put it on without commentary. Override, Shaw said at the panel, as if a word could shame procedure. Override denied, the room said, kind. And clear. Director flag in effect. The director blinked, mask in hand. He did not look surprised. You armed it, Mara said. He shook his head once. I told the system to test integrity. It interpreted generously. Shaw didn't swear. He made a noise that made swearing seem unambitious. We have 90 seconds. Orpheus has its own air, Mara said, already pulling the panel closer. It's a microenvironment. We can shelter here and kill the feed to Vault C if Catalyst will let a custodian misbehave. Vale's eyes flicked to the countdown, then to Mara's hands. If it won't. She didn't answer. She fed another onion skin key into the seam and held her breath, while the vault considered whether people remaining alive counted as a policy violation. Custodian override on gas accepted. It said, her mother's voice refusing to make. Relief sound like permission. Orpheus environment sealed. Vault C vents closed. External halon discharge will continue. Time to equilibrium, 60 seconds. The vents in the main room above their heads hissed and then roared like a storm no one could see. The Orpheus panel's edges breathed in and then stopped, a controlled inhale made into architecture. Inside, Shaw said. All of you. The suits didn't argue because arguing requires oxygen. The director stepped inside last, his mask hanging, the expression of a man already composing tomorrow's story about today. The Orpheus chamber was built for records, not for men in the habit of having their own air. 5 bodies made it a lesson. In geometry, elbows negotiated, shoulders apologized. Mara stood with her back to the thin case on the plinth, her palm flat, as if to keep something from walking away while the room decided if keeping them was a favor. The hiss outside deepened. Then the world went flat, the particular silence of Halon, a noise made from subtraction. Shaw checked his watch. We ride this out. Mara used the 30 seconds the building had converted into a delicate kind of grace to do small things. That would later be called luck. She tightened a strap on the shorter suit's mask a notch. She repositioned the director's seal without asking permission, because he would not faint here and give gravity the last word. She tapped Vale's mask twice, the signal for breathe slower. He met her eyes, nodded, and obeyed like a man finally remembering a teacher he hadn't realized he'd had. Outside the panel, something banged metal hitting floor, a tool dropped. By a hand that had learned it didn't own air. Then quiet like a closed book, when the hiss eased, it didn't end so much as give up. The panel registered a return to something the censors would call normal and poets would call mercy. Discharge complete. The vault said. Environment reset. Shaw cracked the panel an inch. The room outside was a still photograph. Air returned with the taste of a basement after rain. He widened the gap, listened, widened again, then stepped out first the way a person shapes, their own epitaph in case someone reads it. Mara followed with the catalyst in one hand, and the thin case in the other. Bodies dotted the floor, no one. Dead, everyone humbled. The Halon had introduced itself efficiently. Operators coughed. A tech sat, mask in his lap, the wild gratitude of a near-miss busy writing new religion behind his eyes. Vale peeled his mask and made a face. I smell like a refrigerator we unplugged in June. Congratulations, Mara said. You get to complain. The director removed his mask last. He looked at the room as if it had failed a test he'd been generous enough to administer. This was necessary, he said. No, Shaw said. It was convenient. The panel coughed a new line of text. Alert. Orpheus chain attempt source. Unknown. Interference near archives. Mara's stomach went practical. Someone had tried to tell Orpheus a story about who owned it from within the building while they'd been sealed. It hadn't worked. It had tried. Archives, she said. Now, Shaw nodded, already moving. Vale fell in, his mask slung like an ugly necklace. The suits regrouped into their choreography. The director followed, the strange calm of someone keeping count in a currency. No one else could see. They took stairs because elevators get sentimental on nights like this. The building's bones creaked expansion and contraction, arguing about which of them deserved the blame. On the landing, Mara paused long enough to retighten her shoelace and felt the small relief of control return to a piece of her body she could command. Archives smelled like cardboard making promises. Rows of gray boxes were labels that reassured. Anyone with eyes and punished anyone without hands. The lights hummed. The temperature was a reasonable lie about winter. A door stood half open at the back, a door that should have been too heavy to half anything. Its sign said employees only with sincerity that had never been tested. Vale drew up, angled to the hinge side, and waited for Shaw's exhale to become a gesture. Shaw nodded. Vale pushed. The door resisted like a memory. It gave, then caught. On something soft. A man slumped on the floor, breathing shallow. Not the hoodie, not a suit. A mid-level human being with a face built to pass without complaint. His temple wore a bruise that had chosen the color purple like it meant it. A small device lay near his hand, its LED dead, its purpose at large. Mara knelt, fingers pressing under his jaw, counting. He's fine, she said, embarrassed later, perhaps sooner. She slid the device into an evidence bag. RF repeater. Someone wanted Orpheus to hear a new custodian. Shaw scanned the room with a predator's pragmatism. Where? Mara pointed at a junction panel built into the back wall. Its faceplate was labeled Climate Secondary. The screws showed a fresh enthusiasm for turning. She undid them with a torque that made future her happy. Behind, a cavity opened onto a narrow service run. A cable no one had asked permission to lay snaked into the dark. She followed it with her headlamp beam. It vanished up and left, into a space thick with dust and the secret comfort of places men forget when they argue about money. Drop a if you've ever found someone else's. Shortcut and turned it into a long way home. A faint whine pulsed, not power. A battery telling a friend it was ready. Mara slid her hand into the gap and felt the cable's jacket bite her knuckles. She followed its tension to a small box taped under a lip of metal. She peeled it off one-handed. With the kind of tactile arrogance only people who label their bins in pencil acquire, and let it fall into her other palm. The box was anonymous and generic. The tape was the cheap, shiny kind that fails in the first heat wave. The mind behind its placement had planned to come back for it tonight. It wouldn't get to. She bagged it. "Get this to forensics," she said to a suit who had mastered the art of pretending to be scenery, and tonight had become useful again. "And stop thinking scenery doesn't get lines." He blinked, took the bag, and left without arguing. The other suit stayed and examined a catalog of reasons to be anywhere else. Shaw rested his palm on the junction's edge. "We keep moving." "Wait," Mara said, because waiting sometimes keeps the next bad decision from getting its shoes on. "Look," she pointed. A smear of gray across the dust on the lip where the box had sat. A second smear lower, palm-shaped, small enough to have belonged to a person who wore rings when they weren't working and chewed their thumb when no one saw. The director leaned in. "What am I looking at?" "Someone who comes here often." "Enough the dust knows their hand," she said. "Someone who was told this was a safe corner and believed it." Vale was already on the radio. "Camera coverage?" "Dead for 20 minutes, Op said. Then came back as if it left to buy milk and decided it had remembered how to love us." Mara closed the panel, put the screws back in, and wiped her prints because kindness to future forensics is free. She stood. "Orpheus held," she said. "But this isn't over. Whoever's driving the false evacuations and the hydro ghost wants something specific. Tonight isn't chaos. It's a conductor." Shaw tilted his head. "And the song. The audit," she said. "And then a chain only they can hold." The director's sigh was tiny, like a pause on a metronome. "We're done here," he said. Shaw resumed normal operations. As Keene returned to interview 2. He said it the way a magician claps between tricks. The room did not applaud. Mara looked at Shaw, then at Vale. Vale's face did the thing it had not learned to do until now: decide without asking which uniform was more expensive. He didn't move. Shaw's phone buzzed. A text. He read it, and his eyebrows performed a seminar in how men learn to be careful. He turned the screen so Mara could see. A photo from an operator on the south fence, the vans again. The plate on. The lead had been swapped. The new one matched a procurement vehicle that had been used to sign for replacement badge shells 2 weeks ago. "Internal," he said. "Internal," she echoed. The director smiled the way you smile when you're bored in a waiting room and the receptionist has decided to keep you humble. Conspiracy is a poor use of your time. Mara set the thin case on a cart, engaging the brake the way a person says a prayer, and put both hands flat. "Conspiracy is when we don't know the names," she said. "Audit is when we do." She looked at Shaw. "We open the audit now." "Do it," he said. She took one of the catalyst keys, held it up to the archive's light, and slid it into the lock of a cabinet marked with a red stripe that had been painted to look less loud than red usually is. The lock accepted the present and asked for the past. Phrase. The building said. She palmed the tiny ridges on the onion skin and put a sentence into the metal that she had saved for nights when her blood needed a reason to keep circulating. "Inside a body that wasn't done yet. We rest with purpose, not apology," she said, because the audit would make them tired. And she wanted the tired to know it was invited. The cabinet door opened on files that smelled like paper making jokes at PDF's expense. Names, signatures, receipts, copies of emails, printed because the person who printed them knew. Servers get ambitious when told to forget. She pulled the file labeled Service Gate Supervisor Temporary Override. On the 4th page, a signature that had signed fundraisers and reprimands in a college. Class and ethics stood under a line that did not admit strangers. The director had signed his own drill, Shaw's. Mouth found a shape that a floor would recognize if a floor could swear. Vale's jaw wanted to be a cliff and had to settle for resolution. The director didn't blink. He was too good at this to blink. It's a template. Mara slid the file back into its sheath, careful with corners. No, she said. It's a trail. The vault panel blinked. A line of text walked in like a messenger who had been told to knock twice and not wait. Perimeter North Tunnel. Reach. Shaw's fingers stabbed a map out of muscle memory. There's no North Tunnel. There is if you inherited a campus from a company that used to pretend it made water. Mara said. Utilities tunnels don't vanish. They get bored. She reached for the shelf marked Utility Runs Legacy. The binder tried to remember where it had left its spine. It found the page like a dog who had decided to love you before you deserved it. A dotted line ran under the compound skin, from the old water plant's footprint to a wall that had never been a wall for people who knew where to lean. Mara's eyes traced the line and landed on the place the building had forgotten to insist on being a building. North Tunnel exists, she said. And if our vans couldn't get the south gate to Neil, they'll try something older. They'll try a door that believes in the past. Shaw's radio came alive with a voice that had traded patience for running. We got movement in the north maintenance yard. No vans, just feet. Fast ones. Seal it, Shaw said. We can't, the voice replied, and apologized to physics. It's open. Mara closed the binder, tightened the laces of her mind, and turned to the men in the room who had forgotten they were not the plot. We can close it, she said. But the lock is in Orpheus. She didn't wait for permission. That had expired 10 minutes ago. She ran. The hallway leaned as if trying briefly to assist. Her breath ran the count whether she needed it or not. 4 in, 6 out. Calm makes edges sharp. She cut left where routine would have gone right, slid through a half door she hadn't noticed until tonight taught her to, and reached the ladder. Orpheus woke as she approached, the panel greeting her with a softness that made her ache. The catalyst's timer told a hard truth. 23 minutes. She fed the last onion skin key into a slot that had not existed yesterday, says the part of the brain that insists on rules. The panel disagreed. It accepted. It offered up a new menu, one that did not believe in words for anyone else. It believed in geometry. She pressed 3 points where the microdots told her to press. The building exhaled, deep and low. North. Tunnel locks armed, it said. Custodian command required. Lock, she said. And flood the last 20 meters with something that makes shoes loud. Water is available, it said, dignified. Foam is fun. Foam, she said, and then, because a joke at the end of a hard day is a rope thrown to a person climbing, have fun. The building had fun. Somewhere under their feet, men who believed in shortcuts met bubbles and friction and a grade. They hadn't studied. They would retreat or they would learn. Both were acceptable. Vale's voice came through a breath later, complete with the sound of a man not hating his job for the first time since he'd learned it. North Tunnel's a slip and slide. We got retreats. Repeat, enthusiastic retreats. Shaw laughed without noise. It made the air better. The director did not smile. He wasn't built for the kind that doesn't land on a ledger. Mara's phone buzzed a message that had no right to come now and every right to be here. Unknown number. A photo. The inside of a van. Racks. A small black box with an LED bent into humility. A hand in the lower corner. Thumb chewed. Text. You didn't open the right door. We will. She lifted the phone so Shaw could see. His breath thinned. The right door, he said. Which one do they think that is? Orpheus, she said. Or what they think is behind it. The catalyst timer ticked. 19 minutes. She looked at the ledger. She looked at the director. She looked at the door that had said her name the way only 2 people had ever said it. She made a choice the way a person chooses which hand to catch a falling knife with. She reached for the thin case on the plinth. "Shaw," she said, "if this is a story about the audit, we can end it with signatures. If it's a story about Orpheus, it ends with something else. I need to know which page we're on." He met her eyes and told the truth that would cost him hours and give him a reason to deserve them. "Both," she nodded. "Then we open the thing my mother built so you can keep the thing your city needs." Her fingers found the latch on the plinth's base. Another seam. Another dare. Another place where two halves pretended to be one. She pressed. The plinth sighed. A drawer slid out. Inside, a cylinder lay on dark foam. Matte, heavy, no label. Just a symbol etched in quiet depth. A circle bisected by a line. Mara lifted it. It had the balance of something that wanted to be held in the hand and not in the eyes. A cap unscrewed with a sense of humor about threads. Inside, a stack of smaller onion skins weighted different from the keys. These were printed with geometry that felt like music you couldn't hear yet. An insert lay on top. Orpheus seeds. If a system forgets how to be fair, plant one. It will grow a door where you need one. It will die when it should. The intercom, polite and late, offered another uninvited guest. Alert. East Bay override request. Source. Director Office. Shaw turned to the director. "Sir." The director spread his hands like a politician, proving he hadn't hidden anything except his expectations. "I'm resetting access. We're past this charade." Mara slid one Orpheus seed into her vest. She pocketed a second for the part of her that didn't trust tomorrow. She closed the cylinder and looked up. "Then this becomes simple," she said. "You're either with the chain or you're against it." He smiled like a man who had lost a vote and was already raising funds off the defeat. "I'm with outcomes." The vault's lights hiccuped, recovered, and hiccuped again. "Power fluctuation," Op said over the intercom. "Don't panic. Everyone freeze in place so I can hate the right breaker." Mara's phone buzzed again. Another photo from the unknown number. A close-up of the Orpheus panel seam. The tiny scuff she'd made with the feeler gauge. "Proof of proximity. We're already inside," the text said. She looked at the panel. It was where it had been, honest in its deceit. She looked at the ladder to the platform, at the shadow moving where a shadow shouldn't. A fraction of a fraction that would have been a blink if it had been human. Vale exhaled. "We got a rat." Shaw raised his hand, palm flat. "The universal sign for weight that children obey better than operators." The room did as it was told. Air stretched, thin as a violin string. The shadow moved again and formed a man with a cap and a hoodie and a new idea about luck. He stepped out of the service run beside the ladder, a pry bar in his hand and a plan that had never involved Halon. He looked at the director. The director looked back and did not look surprised. The intruder lifted the pry bar toward Orpheus. Mara didn't think. She threw the cylinder cap. It hit the bar, slid, and ricocheted into the panel. The intruder flinched the way men flinch when objects don't behave. Shaw moved. Vale moved. The suits pretended to be the wall and failed. The director did nothing, which was a kind of statement. The pry bar hit the seam and wedged. The vault made a sound Mara had hoped never to hear. A sound built to be soft so panic would not get ideas. A sound that meant a room that loved records. Was about to make a choice about people. "Unauthorized force on Orpheus," it said. "Custodian, do you want me to close?" Mara opened her mouth to say yes. The building went black. Not a flicker, not a dim. A subtraction. Her mother's voice arrived in the dark with no panel to write on, no speaker to be blamed, just sound in. "The place where a child's name is kept. Mary," the voice said. "Run." She moved. Not a sprint, not yet. Movement with a plan. Mara slid sideways to clear the Orpheus seam and shoved the thin case into the crook of her elbow. Her free hand found the catalyst by feel. The pry bar kissed metal with a hungry squeal. The intruder's breath gusted warm in the blackout. He'd thought darkness would make him a magician. Darkness just made honesty cheaper. "Hands," Shaw said, voice flat. Metal rasped as he cleared the intruder's grip with a twist that prized compliance without drama. A body hit the jam. A curse bit its own tongue. Emergency lighting stuttered once, found itself, and came up as a red umbra that made edges soft and decisions hard. The vault's outlines returned like ghosts trying to be helpful. "Move," Mara said, already handing Vale the catalyst cylinder. "Keep it level. If you drop it, lie to me after." Vale's fingers closed, reflex pure. He didn't ask. Questions his pride would owe interest on later. "Where?" "Archives, then South Utility," she said. "We keep Orpheus and white keys with people, not rooms." The director's silhouette took up the doorway with the peculiar volume of a man unused to being a passenger in anyone's plan. "Miss Keene, you are not authorized." "Sir," Shaw said, and put 3 syllables into the word that turned it into a barricade. "We are leaving. You're with us." The shorter suit adjusted his tie in the dark, a pet habit refusing to yield to crisis. He cleared his throat like a man who would declare jurisdiction, given even a closet to himself. "We require chain of custody documentation." Mara thrust the pen lanyard into his chest and made his hands hold it. "Congratulations, you're the scribe." She clicked her headlamp to life. A tight cone of white traced the floor, and then the low, tight world 3 feet ahead. The beam steadied her breathing as surely as counting. "Drop a, if you've ever made a plan inside 15 seconds, because the luxury version of the minute didn't show up." They exited the vault in a staggered file that read as competence to anyone with field time and as mutiny to anyone who loved memos. Vale took rear with the catalyst. Shaw took point with a pry bar of his own. The director stayed in the protected center by simple gravity. Suits to either side. Mara checked over her shoulder twice, and then stopped checking, trust squandered. Attention faster than fear. At the first corridor bend, she palmed the wall where the paint wore thin. She knew the building's idiosyncrasies the way mechanics. "No curses." "Latch," she murmured. Her fingers found the recess, pinched and pulled. A waist-high cabinet side open to reveal a clutch of chemlights taped in green bundles. She cracked 3. Green fog spilled into the red air and became the color of a decision she could own. "Why?" Vale said softly. "Because batteries lose faith," she said, tossing him 1. "And because green means come here when our radios decide to get divorced." They moved. The intruder in the hoodie groaned once and then found the wisdom to be quiet. Shaw had left him zip-tied to a handrail with knots that would hold a philosophy seminar. At the stairwell, Mara paused. The air carried the char of halon aftertaste and the wet stone smell of foam. Distant, a whistle barked too short, long. Long. A crossing captain held an intersection somewhere by refusing to be small. "South Utility," Shaw said. Mara shook her head. "Not yet. They'll try to cut us off at the training floor choke. We take the laundry corridor and punch through. The equipment cages. Crowded, but it smells like detergent instead of intention." He didn't ask how she knew the laundry corridor, because good leaders save smart questions for later when they can be compliments. "Go." They descended 1 level, headlamps in chemlight fog pooling ahead of their ankles. The laundry corridor, presented as a simple hall with an opinion about lint. Mara took the right, then the left, then slapped a lever that looked ornamental. A panel slid, grudging, revealing a maintenance alley the architect had intended as an apology to plumbers. "Who built this building?" Vale breathed. His incredulity had lost its audience and become private. "People who remembered things," she said. "Then people who forgot." The maintenance alley spat them out near equipment cage 3. The padlock on the wire mesh stared like a pupil. Mara fed an onion skin catalyst key map into the small, ugly reader bolted to the cage. The reader, which had gone dark in the blackout, woke from some last gasp reserve and decided to believe in geometry. "Cage 3, she told it, softly. "Let me borrow my life." The lock clicked. The chain sighed. She rolled the door aside and went straight to the second shelf. The microdrone case sat where she had left it, uniform and unafraid. She kissed the latch with a thumb and checked battery markers by braille. "Take it," Shaw said. "We'll use it for corners." She handed Vale the transmitter slate. He took it without the old disdain. His thumbs found the controls with ugly efficiency. "Flying blind," he said. "Thermal only," she said. "Keep it waist-high unless you want bent props." He sent the drone out of the cage in a slow, low drift, its whisper quieter than fear. The thermal bloom showed warm bodies peeking. From cold corners, no movement ahead. No men waiting with flashlights and optimism. He nodded and returned it to hover. "Drop a if you've ever trusted a tool because you tuned it, not because someone told you it was expensive." They moved again. At the training floor crossway, the drone's thermal feed found 2 brighter smudges. Mara held up a palm. The file stopped like a thought, finishing on time. She knelt, found the fire extinguisher bracket she'd installed too months ago because the original had been loose, and slid the cylinder free. "On me," she whispered. Shaw aligned to her left, Vale to her right. The director and suits crouched awkwardly, wealthy and low for once. She swung out. 2 men, ball caps, enthusiasm. Wrong map. Looked up. Surprised the way you get surprised when you think a hallway is a concept and discover it's a person. She discharged the extinguisher in a white arc. CO snowed their plans. Shaw stepped into the cloud and relieved them of choices. Vale's elbow took a rib's opinion and canceled it. The men went down without ceremony. The floor collected. "Them like lost luggage. Bind them," Shaw said. "We're out of patience." They made knots. The scribe suit wrote down times with reluctantly good penmanship. "South Utility," Mara said when the hallway gave back its quiet. "Now." South Utility meant industrial calm. Pipes ran like sentences written by someone who believed grammar was kindness. The air cooled, sound sharpened. Mara's breath returned to 4 and 6 without her asking. At the junction box labeled irrigation. "Timers." Shaw paused with the weight of a man about to owe someone a favor. "You were right," he said. "It was written down," she said. "I read it." They pulled the panel. The manual counter override inside had been tripped and held with a cheap wedge. She plucked the wedge free, reset the counter with 2 satisfying clicks, and watched the relay fall back into a posture that smelled like honesty. Ops came in through Shaw's lapel. "Southgate back to normal," the voice said, breath hitching once with relief. "Do we clap?" "Send it flowers later," Mara said. "Right now, send 4 people with gross motor skills and tell them I said please." They pushed back into the corridor river. The building thought about being a maze and then decided not to. The emergency lights hummed. Somewhere a generator tested its pride and passed. The director spoke without turning his head. "Ms. Keene, you are jeopardizing." "The audit already told us who jeopardized what," Mara said. "If I'm wrong, your handwriting will apologize in court." The shorter suit, scribe pen clenched like a life buoy, glanced at her without malice. "Do you know the cost of saying that to a director?" "Yes," she said. "It's exactly 3 seconds, and then you keep moving." They kept moving. At a T intersection, the drone's thermal feed bloomed. 4 heat signatures. Close, 2 crouched, 2 standing. The corridor kinked left around a vending alcove. A perfect place to invent regret. Mara peeled an Orpheus seed from her vest and held it the way a person holds the last pill in a bottle. The geometry on the onion skin winked like a microstar map. "What is that?" Vale said, soft as a scuff. "Plan B," she said. or Plan A with bad timing. She pressed the seed against the wall opposite the alcove at hip height and smoothed the paper with her palm. The ink warmed. The geometry translated. The wall decided to have a door dot. It wasn't beautiful. It didn't need to be. A seam wrote itself into paint like truth advancing. A small bio slot blinked alive. Phrase, the building said. Intimate in a way only machines who've stolen your lullabies can be. We are not made of sugar. She breathed. The seam parted just enough. A shallow pocket waited a slice of absence big enough for 4 people to not be shot in. She pushed Shaw and the director into the pocket, then Vale and the scribe. The taller suit looked at her and at the hallway and at the fact that he had run out of rolls. She grabbed his sleeve and yanked him through. The pocket swallowed them and closed. Sound softened. The temperature fell a degree. The intruders, at the alcove moved, men measuring a corner the wrong way. They stepped into a space that had lost them. Mara held her breath. 4 counts, 6, the men drifted past. One glanced at the wall where the seam had been and found only paint. The other juggled a radio that didn't love him. They moved on. The pocket door hissed questioningly. Expire. Not yet, she whispered. Give me 2 minutes and then forget I asked. The geometry cooled. The seam lingered. Vale exhaled, a sound like gratitude finding literacy. That's new. Or old, she said. Depending on where you learn to be brave. They slipped back into the corridor when the footsteps bled away. The maintenance alley lay ahead, a dark comma. Mara marked the seam with the tip of her pen. A dot that would mean nothing to anyone who didn't keep their pens sharp. Ops? Shaw said into his mic. Status NICU. Warm and righteous, Ops said. Hydro safe. Traffic human. False evacuations down to rumor speed. North tunnel sulking. Good, Shaw said. Hold it. They reached the service elevator. Bank dead doors pried. Counterweights hung like old muscles. Beyond, the corridor bent toward interview suites, Ops, and the director's office, the triumvirate that wrote reports about each other when nights like this refused to be discrete events. Interview 2. The director said mildly, as if the square of carpet in that room could restore a balance the building no longer recognized. Later, Mara said. After we deliver Orpheus and White Keys to a place where the chain isn't a suggestion. Where is that? Vale asked. Somewhere with light and witnesses, she said. And a camera that still believes we exist. Shaw lifted his chin at Ops. Conference B, does it have eyes? 2. Independent, wired. 1 hidden in the smoke detector because you insisted. Ops said. Bless my arrogance, Shaw said. We'll use B. They cut across the open space. The drone drifted ahead and snagged on a draft from a vent. That wanted to make wind again. Vale nudged it with 1 finger, joyless and accurate. It stabilized. Conference B's door accepted the catalyst key map like a child accepts a clean bandage. The lights rose. Cameras blinked. One made a little click an honest man would ignore and a careful woman would admire. Mara set the thin case on the table and laid the catalyst cylinder beside it with the care you give a violin in a room full of elbows. She took a breath that organized her ribs. Okay, she said. We lock the door. We open the chain to 4 signatures. We record. We copy. We publish to the internal server with a dead man to the city, EOC if the file gets touched. The director's smile made a valiant attempt to be relevant. You will not publish classified material. Sir, Shaw said, and slid the ledger toward the camera. You classified a drill. You declassified our oxygen. The shorter suit wrote the time. His pen scratched a line that sounded like a needle on lacquer. Drop a, if you've ever had to prove the obvious 5 times because the wrong person owned the calendar. Mara pricked, pressed, fed the BIO slot on the catalyst and on the chain binder in turn. Shaw lent blood. Vale did too without being asked. eyes on the lens as if understanding finally had a place to stand other than his jaw. The director refused. He stepped back, hands in pockets, the portrait of a man who had practiced how to look while other people worked. I do not co-sign mistakes. The door side. Not the conference door. The hallway. Footsteps ran the length of the corridor. A breath later, the light's brownout blinked, a wave moving across the ceiling like a cloud, figuring out it could be an animal. Ops shouted through the mic. East Bay breach, someone found a live panel. We're losing doors. Cut power to the east wing, Shaw said. Already did. They brought their own, Ops said. Portable jammers and duct tape miracles. The conference door's lock chirped, not a fail. A frown. Mara looked at the catalyst clock. 9 minutes. We're going to be interrupted, she said. So, we choose our last word. Vale glanced down the corridor where the drone showed heat signatures picking up courage. Make it a good one. Mara opened the thin case's last compartment. A small glass vial waited, a red cap, a note in her mother's hand that took the room's temperature and refused to catch it. If the room asks who you are, answer. She lifted the vial. The liquid inside held a shimmer like heat above asphalt. The label read, VOX Custodian Authentication Once. What is it? Vale said. A truth serum for buildings, she said. It makes the chain sing the custodian's name out loud and tells the system to believe it when men don't. The director's eyes flickered, not surprise, not fear. Something older and harder to spend. Recognition. Don't, he said. Mara held the vial above the catalyst's mouth. We don't have time for the long fight, she said. We'll have it later. For now, the building speaks. She cracked the cap. The smell was laboratory clean, the ghost of ethanol and citrus. She poured it into the catalyst's throat. The room inhaled. The chain woke with sound. The panel, the vents, the cameras, the door lock, and somewhere deep under their feet, an old relay that had forgotten it had a voice all of them spoke at. Once, custodian. Keen Mara Elodie, the building said, calm and through every wire. Maternal voice. Dr. Elodie Keen, recorded. Paternal pattern. Match not in file. The last line typed itself into the air. Not in file. Mara swallowed. It wasn't a question she could afford. Not now. Chain bound, the building continued. Director level overrides sealed pending Federal Observer countersignature or majority of emergency board. External orders denied. Internal orders. Logged. The door at the end of the corridor hit something that refused to be door any longer and stopped being itself. Metal screamed, men shouted. The jam of 3 egos and 1 bad plan spilled on the floor like a dropped bucket of parts. Vale stood. Shaw stood. Mara did not. She took another breath and slid the ledger into the scanner. The camera blinked. The file wrote to disk with the satisfying inevitability of gravity. She pressed send to EOC with a timer set for 3 minutes. The director moved, fast. He crossed the space with a speed that did not match his conversational posture and put his hand over the send. His palm was warm and carried the friction of a man who lifted things sometimes when no one wrote it down. Miss Keen, he said. Pleasant as a furnished lobby, you will not. Shaw's hand found the director's wrist. He didn't squeeze. The squeeze was implied. Sir, he said. Enough. The shorter suit did a thing so small it could have been a mistake. He slid his pen into his jacket and removed a different one, cheaper, scruffier, real. He clicked. It once. It was a camera. He pointed it at the director's hand. The director looked at the pen, and then at Mara, and then at his own options. He lifted his hand. 3 minutes, Mara said. If we're wrong, EOC gets a bedtime story in triplicate. If we're right, we keep 10 ambulances from sitting at a light, because someone thinks a strip of asphalt deserves a better night than a child. He said nothing. The option of saying nothing had finally turned on him. She recognized the look. It was the look of a man in a room he did not own. The hall exploded into noise. Intruders hit the conference door. The lock held. Metal groaned. A pry bar bit the seam. A boot argued with physics. The drone's thermal image jittered as if it had decided to learn empathy. Sean nodded to Vale. Vale nodded back. They moved as a pair who had decided to file the last 3 hours under preparation instead of humiliation. Ready, Shaw said. Mara stood and finished what she had started. She sealed the thin case. She clipped the catalyst to her vest with a paracord loop. She put the Orpheus cylinder into a sling. She made out of a projector cable and a stubborn smile. She looked at the camera in the smoke detector and gave it a sentence she wanted on any transcript men would pretend not to read. Chain is people. She said, buildings just get to help. The door finally made a sound like a decision and buckled inward. The first intruder through was tall and leaned forward like he used to lead with his face in school fights. He met Shaw's pry bar. He met Vale's knee. He met the carpet. The second had better reflexes. He slid left, found the table, hauled it, and discovered conference furniture can still be a weapon. Mara ducked under the table edge and shoved with her shoulder, turning the table into a fulcrum the man hadn't auditioned for. The director stayed back and found his dignity. The suit's filmed because when you can't decide which side of the river to be on, you pretend you're a bridge. Third intruder reached for the catalyst at Mara's vest. He got a fistful of paracord and learned about knots. She twisted, pivoted, and planted him against the wall with the efficient intimacy of someone who knew where edges were put for a reason. Enough, she said into his ear. You're not the story, you're the noise, he snarled. She felt the anger. She felt its weight. She refused to carry it. The fourth intruder didn't enter. He stood in the hall, cap low, hoodie up. He held the pry bar like a baton and stared at her without malice, as if she were a puzzle he was willing to learn how to love. Behind him, in the heat haze, 2 more smudges waited with the patience of equipment. Mara, he said. She froze. The intruder said her name like it had been written on a lunch bag once. Messy and earnest. Who are you? She said, cool. He tilted his chin. Someone who has told you where the door. He pointed the pry bar at the Orpheus cylinder at her. Hip, open it, he said, or we open you. Vale shifted, muscles arguing with principles. Shaw didn't move. The director smiled, a small private rehearsal of relief. The catalyst clock ticked down. 2 minutes. Mara looked at the pen camera in the shorter suit's hand. She looked at the smoke detector's honest eye. She looked at the ledger. She looked at the men who had tried to open doors with violence and found bureaucracy instead. No, she said. The intruder's jaw flexed. Not rage, calculation. He stepped forward. The building made a sound deep and kind. Orpheus spoke for the first time without invitation. Its voice not her mother's, and not the vault's, but a composite of systems choosing to be chorus. Request. Custodian relocation, it said. Threat proximity, 5 meters. Proposed path, underfloor, 90 centimeters east of current position. Mara blinked. She dropped to a knee, pressed her palm to carpet, and found a seam that hadn't existed until the building wanted it to. She peeled it up. A service hatch kissed air. Cold rushed her knuckles. She looked at Shaw. He nodded. He looked at Vale. Vale nodded. She slid the thin case into the hatch and followed with the cylinder. Droppa. If you've ever trusted the map that didn't exist until you asked the room to be brave. The intruder moved. Shaw moved faster. Vale covered the hatch with his body in a way he would later pretend never happened. The director chose not to help and then had the misfortune of being seen not helping by 3 cameras. Mara dropped into the underfloor conduit and found knees, elbows, darkness, and a faint blue stripe painted on concrete to signal the path to people who were meant to be there. She crawled. Her breath counted. She didn't think about the sound behind her because Counting was cheaper. The conduit dog-legged in rows. She found an access panel, knocked twice, and the building recognized the knock because she had learned it during audit week, when no one had the patience to tell a clerk how to be clever. It popped. She spilled into a shallow service corridor, parallel to the east bays. The air smelled like rubber and winter. She listened. Footsteps to her left. None to her right. She went right. The corridor ended at a wall that understood geometry. She pressed an Orpheus seat against it. The door came, tired but willing. She slipped through and closed it. Silence. A room. Small, square, metal shelves with nowhere to be important. A mop bucket. A sign that said cleanliness is safety in a font that had never forgiven itself. Her phone buzzed. Vale, we're in the hatch. 1 minute behind. Keep talking. She typed with her thumb pressed against the catalyst to steady her hand. Mara, door to East Bay closet. I'll plant a last seed for you. She pressed the final Orpheus seed to the inside of the closet's wall facing the bay hallway. The geometry warmed. The seam wrote itself. She fed a whisper to the Bayoport. We rest with purpose, she said. And the door forgave her schedule. She cracked it an inch and saw the East Bay hall, empty for 1 second. That wanted to be a gift. Then the director stepped into frame, not flanked by suits. Not flanked by courage. Alone. He looked at her like a man about to tell a secret only he had earned. Miss Keene, he said quietly, don't run. She didn't. She held the thin case lower and the cylinder higher and counted a breath that would be her last calm one for a handful of minutes. Why? She said. Because, he said, and his voice lost decoration. Your mother didn't die. She left me this building and I gave it the wrong name. The hallway behind him filled with footsteps. Shaw's hand appeared on the hatch edge on her side. Vale's breath arrived like a promise. The catalyst clock flashed 90 seconds. Open Orpheus, the director said. And I will show you where she is. Mara looked at him and saw the shape of a man who loved a thing as long as it made him bigger. She looked at the clock. She looked at the corridor's end where the bay's overhead door sat like a flat horizon. She closed the closet door until only a ribbon of director remained. Her mother's voice, from every seam and nothing at all, folded the air like clean sheets. Mary, it said, choose. The overhead door at the end of the hall rolled up a hand's width. A drone's shadow cut the line. The world waited its turn. The drone's silhouette skated along the lip of the half-open bay door like a needle testing vinyl. It hovered, nosed in, then backed out a hand's width as if it smelled ownership and didn't care for the taste. Mara kept the closet door almost closed and made the gap an instrument, not a risk. She slid one chem light along the floor with the slow push you reserve for glass near a toddler, let it drift into the hall's shallow dip, and watched the drone's sensors notice. It tilted, interrogated green, and lost patience. So did the men behind it. Boots scraped. Someone muttered about time on target. The overhead motor ticked another tooth and lifted the door a second hand's width. Cold air from the bay crawled in, edged with tire rubber and fog. Hold, Shaw breathed from the hatch at Mara's knees. His voice had learned to be a lead weight, without becoming a threat. Vale's whisper tracked the drone's movement, the way a hunter tracks a gnat that thinks it's a bear. Cheap gimbal. They went light on the stabilization. Jammer piggyback undercarriage. If it kisses the door, we'll hear it complain. The director stayed in the corridor like a headline waiting for a verb. Miss Keene, he said quietly, you don't have to make this harder. Then stop making it hard, she said, as calm as a sterile field. She eased the door open a finger more. The drone drifted toward the chem light, sensors choosing color over common sense. She palmed the mop bucket with her free hand and tilted it, sluicing a thin sheet of water across linoleum into the drone's path. The water stilled. The drone dipped to regard its green toy, caught its own downdraft in the mirrored surface. And wobbled. Mara waited exactly the time it takes for small rotors to debate the ethics of hubris, then snapped the closet door wider and flung the bucket at shin height. Metal struck carbon fiber. The drone chattered, panicked, and pinballed off the door. It pinned itself between jam and mop handle, rotors whirring in a helpless scream. Vale's hand flashed past her shoulder. He grabbed the undercarriage as if it were a furious chicken, thumbed the kill switch he'd guessed they'd leave stock, and suffocated the prop wash in his palm. "Down," he said. "She." "Drop a if you've ever fixed a bad idea with a mop and timing." Boots charged. 2 men, caps low. One went for the pry bar again. Shaw took his wrist and wrote a short sentence on the bones beneath. The second stooped for the crippled drone. Mara kicked the bucket into his shins, then shoulder-checked the door and made the frame her ally. The director didn't move. He let the scene happen to him like a man watching surf choose which sandcastle to flatten. Mara pivoted back into the closet and held the thin case low against her shin. "Through," she whispered to Shaw. He drove his man into the jam, created a hole, and Vale slid the drone carcass into the hatch like a waiter who had planned to carry champagne and found himself bussing plastic instead. "Clock," Mara said. 82 seconds, Vale said. Breath steady because his mask drills had finally found it useful to exist. The director, to his credit or his vanity, found a tone that didn't ask permission. "Mara, your mother is not a riddle you solve by being right in this room. You cannot brute force the past." Her first answer tasted like copper. She didn't say it. She said the second one, the one made of habit. "Then show me something that helps the present." A breath, he lifted his phone. No theatrics, no flourish. He swiped. A photo. A woman in profile at a window. The jawline Mara had shaved around in the mirror for years. The hair shorter, the shoulders narrower. The background a cream-painted corridor Mara didn't recognize and recognized. Anyway, the universal geometry of long-term care. "Timestamp 12 days ago," he said. "The facility isn't on Helia's books. It belongs to a foundation with a name that means nothing on purpose. She left in my care when she decided the building had to talk like her. You can confirm if you open Orpheus and ask it why I'm not lying." Mara didn't reach for the phone. She took the picture into her head instead, turned it over once, and set it beside the truth that buildings don't invent lullabies. "You had 20 ways to tell me that earlier," she said. "You chose none." "You weren't the custodian then," he said. "You were a clerk I could count. There it was. The arithmetic of men who think tally marks are love." Shaw's hand brushed her calf. "Move," he said. "We negotiate after our lungs belong to us in a different room." Mara closed the closet. The seam retired to drywall. She crabbed down the hatch, thin case flat against her sternum, Orpheus cylinders slung high. The underfloor conduit smelled like metal teaching dust how to behave. She crawled 3 meters, turned left where the blue stripe argued that right would be rude, and saw Vale's boots descending behind her, then Shaw's, then the director's, then the suit's. They surface breached into another service cubby, then into a maintenance corridor so narrow it required the hierarchy of shoulders. Vale took point now, drone carcass clipped to his vest like a trophy he hadn't decided whether to respect. Mara followed. Shaw ghosted the rear, the director between them like a debt they refused to default. At the first crosshall, Mara paused and flattened a palm to the wall. The building had learned to talk with bone conduction long ago for people who didn't have time for screens. A pulse vibrated back, a low, rhythmic double thrum. "North Tunnel still throwing a tantrum," she murmured. "Foam pumps are singing. East Bay is noisy. Southgate skeletal. Conference B door arguing with idiots." Vale tossed the drone carapace. It thumped off a recycle bin and died with dignity. "Make me captain of corridors," he said dryly. "You're captain of one," she said. "This one." They banked left, then right. A cleaning cart blocked the path, abandoned in a hurry by a person who discovered fear. doesn't apologize for mops. Mara parked it square and braked the wheels. Small order is insurance. Drop a if you've ever made a hallway a plan. The corridor opened into a shallow mechanical room that had once been a closet's big brother and now was the shy parent of Orpheus's little cousins. A wall plate labeled Courier Crown caught Mara's headlamp. She moved to it with the reverence of a manila envelope over a live grenade. "We get the audit microfilm out here," she said. "Analog courier tube to the city, EOC. It bypasses networks and egos. It cares about gravity." She slotted the crown ledger roll into the tube cradle, clipped the lid foil, and dialed the hand crank until the pressure gauge's needle admitted it believed. She listened, the building's throat clearing. The tube swallowed the roll with a sound like water deciding to become useful. "Gone," she said, saving in transit. Shaw's exhale carried 3 words he deserved to say later when the room wouldn't record them. "You're good, Keen." "Good is boring," she said. "Boring gets babies warm." Vale checked. The drone again, rolled it in his hands as if deciding whether he hated it or how to fix it. He set it down with a little clack that sounded like reluctance getting persuaded. The director leaned on the door, jam not casual. "Exactly, but proficient at appearing to be. You still have a problem you can't courier," he said. "A building that will only tell the truth to your DNA, and an intruder who believes it can be bribed. You open Orpheus, or he will peel this place until he finds the part of you he needs." "Or," Mara said, "we move the part of me he needs." Vale blinked. "You can't change your DNA." "No," she said. "But I can change where I am when the building thinks I am me." They stared at her. She tapped the cylinder. "Orpheus seeds make doors. Yes, they also make lies. We can stamp a timed false presence in a place that isn't this corridor. A decoy custodian trail. He chases the ghost. We work." Shaw was already nodding. "Do it." She peeled a seed from the stack with fingers that kept their poise, because the day had respected the practice. She pressed it to the panel beside the courier port and smoothed it until the geometry warmed. The bioslot blinked awake. Mara pricked and fed and whispered her father's instruction because he had taught her how to make edges matter even when choices blurred. Calm makes edges sharp. The panel breathed in the idea of her and then exhaled it into the building's bloodstream. Orpheus templated the signature. Somewhere down the hall, a service hatch clicked like a fox stepping on a twig. Decoy set. The vault said in a voice that borrowed her mother's kindness and gave it boundaries. Custodian presence registered at South Archives Annex. Expiration: 7 minutes. "Move," Mara said. They moved. At the annex corner. 2 figures in attire that had talked to asphalt too long took the wrong turn into the wrong hallway and found Vale's knee again. It was a busy night for that knee. Shaw turned a second with the elegance of a man who had once loved a fight and now loved making sure it was short. They entered the annex. Lights had negotiated a compromise with the blackout. A thin, honest hum ran under the tile. The decoy hatch small, waist-high, coy-weighted open. Mara palmed the jam and felt the ghost of her own signature present as a current. Good enough to fool a hungry scanner, not good enough to get a person killed. "Leave it," she said. "Let him eat." 5 minutes, Vale said, glancing at the catalyst clock. "Then the paper goes dumb." "Then he gets indigestion," she said. They crossed the annex and slid into a slimmer corridor built in. The era when buildings expected people to be smaller and kinder. At the end, a steel door waited with a hinge you couldn't butter with a kitchen knife. The sign said Archives Cold. This is where we hibernate when computers catch fevers. Mara said, or when we want the building to chill its opinions. She fed another onion skin to the seam. The lock accepted, sighed, and swung. Air hugged their faces dry. Paper-cool. Inside. The cold archive felt like a chapel that did bookkeeping. Racks whispered. Labels behaved. A floor drain admitted that gravity happens. Mara set the thin case on a rolling shelf and clipped the Orpheus cylinder to the cart's upright. She took 10 seconds to align the case's latches with the cart's crossbars and cinch a short strap through the handles. 10 seconds isn't long. It's also everything if someone trips. Shaw watched with the paradoxical patience he afforded only to competence that saved time later. You make a habit of being the reason my job gets less stupid, he said. Same, she said, and meant it. Drop a if you measure trust in who tightens what they touch. The door behind them thud not a knock. A consequence. Decoy expired. Custodian presence cleared at NX. The vault informed the room with a composure that made bad news chewable. New custody attempt at East Bay. Unauthorized. Force. Of course, Mara said. Ops broke in. Keen Shaw, we've got movement outside the East Bay again. Looks like they realized the drone died, and now someone brought cutters. Keep them entertained, Shaw said. Borrow whistles. Take names later. The director stepped deeper into the cold room and looked smaller for it. Mara, he said softly, real and unguarded for the first time in a night that hadn't forgiven many performances. Listen to me for 10 seconds that aren't a transaction. Elodie is alive. She's also not the voice you hear. I licensed that voice from her because she believed it would save lives more reliably than politics. She wanted you out of here, not attached to it. Then why put me in the chain? She asked. No heat. The question weighed itself. I didn't, he said. She did. Something tightened behind her breastbone, the good ache that happens when a long muscle is reminded it still works. Where is she? Mara asked. His mouth flattened. I will tell you when the building isn't bleeding. It was plausible. It was infuriating. It was probably right. The cold room's far wall buzzed subtle, a wire humming under paint. The lights hiccuped. The building thought about going back to sleep and decided to be polite instead. Mara snapped the cart's brake and put her palm flat on the thin case. We take Orpheus to the hurricane door, she said. It's old, stupid, and better than we are at not dying. Vale grinned too quickly for it to be anything but nerves flirting with relief. Best door on campus, Shaw nodded. Go. They exited the cold room, went right, then down a service-rung stairs that had seen better polish on better days. The hurricane door sat at the end of a stub corridor like a stubborn grandfather's steel, thick, spring-loaded, with a manual crossbar and a window that preferred memory to light. A brass placard read, Wind Surge /people. Mara set the cart in the recess and unlatched the crossbar. It hammered her forearms with 40 pounds of spring joy. She jammed it with a wedge so her fingers got a vote and pressed her thumb to the maintenance. Reader, no power, Vale said. Then we make some, she said, snagging the hand crank from the Archie kit and mating it to the emergency generator port. Count to 30, slow. Shaw cranked. Vale cranked. The director folded his hands. And then, surprising them all, took a turn at 12 without commentary. The reader winked awake like a child roused from a nap by loved chaos. Custodian, it said, and the word did something to her. She didn't have time to catalog. She fed. The onion skin. The door believed. It'll hold against men who mistake metal for permission, she said. And it'll like us if the building remembers wind. The corridor to ops ran perpendicular to the hurricane door. Voices rolled down. It liked marbles. Men running talk when running becomes belief. Vale steadied the drone transmitter on the cart lip, one eye on the thermal overlay. 2 heads, 3, maybe 4, he said. One's limping. Make him limp more, Shaw said. He didn't have to. The limper met the crossbar's affection and sat down with regret. Mara took the casters off the cart with her foot, a childish trick that always gave her 2 seconds of glee for free, and pushed the cart into the hurricane recess. She locked the wheels, checked the strap, then checked her fingers as if she expected them to have opinions about rope. Ops, Shaw said into his mic. We're at the hurricane door. Tell B to get me 2 more bodies, and a crash cart. No, not a real crash cart. A metaphorical one with elbow pads. Copy, Op said. And then, because the person on the other end had earned the right to get personal when the room wasn't looking, Keen, the head nurse, says your habits will get a recipe named after you in the break room. Mara smiled into the tired paper air. Tell her tape should be snug like you mean it, not angry like it means you. The mic clicked. Somewhere a nurse laughed the laugh. That says a room just got less mean. Drop a if you have one line that still hears your mother. The hurricane door moaned, adjusted, remembered its purpose, and hushed. The men in the corridor decided, as men sometimes do when faced with something older and heavier than they are, to live. Director, Mara said without looking at him. When we survive, you explain the foundation. You bring me where she is. You let me decide what kind of daughter I can be while being this. She gestured with her chin at the building that had accepted her blood as a grammar. He didn't answer. He would. Later. He'd learned tonight that later might not put up with him. The hallway bucked. Not an earthquake. A generator shift. The big diesel at the west lot coughing into primary after the smart UP says ran out of compliments. Lights browned, then steadied. The hum under the tile deepened into a note you could set your cutlery to. Ops burst in the ear again. False evacuation. Wave is back, but it's dumber. We're catching it earlier. Whoever is running it got lazy or lonely. Lonely, Mara said. He wants somebody to answer. Don't. Vale checked his watch. Catalyst? 4 minutes, she said. Then our ephemeral keys turn into memorial service programs. Shaw pressed 2 fingers to his ear. Copy. We'll be ready to be stupid in a more traditional fashion. Mara looked at the cylinder, then at the thin case, then at the hurricane. Doors, hinges. She made a decision her body didn't love. Shaw, Vale, she said. If I strip Orpheus down to protectable weight and cache the rest, we can move faster and lose less if I have to throw a thing down a hole. Vale winced. You think we're going to lose a thing down a hole? I like to plan for holes, she said. She opened the thin case and pulled out the most critical guts, the catalyst, the remaining seeds, the onion skin keys, the voice vials empty. Ampule with its microtrace helpfulness, the manual index pages with grease, and her mother's notes. She wrapped them in the mylar pouch, taped it with a strip that would require cursing to tear, and clipped it under her vest plate. She relatched the case with its heavier components, microfilm supplement, duplicate analogs, the plinth subunit, and rolled it into the cold room's secondary niche where any reasonable human would think the room ended. She pressed her palm against the plaster and whispered to Orpheus. Hide, she said. Hide small, not forever. The wall relaxed enough to swallow 2 fingers and then stopped. It would remember where she put it. She would too. The building loved being asked nicely. Forward. Shaw said. They moved again. The corridor bent toward Ops and became clean fresh paint. Framed mission statements. A wall of commendations that recorded names the building would mispronounce when it was bored. A fresh bruise marred the paint. Near the last corner shoe scuff, heavy, new. Voices scudded in. A man in city blues with a badge that had decided to be weary tried to square his uniform with a pry bar in his hand. He saw them and recalculated. Vale said, don't, with his shoulders. The man didn't. He set the bar down and raised both palms. A performer who discovered the play was honest. Wrong hallway, he said. Didn't come to be a news item. Then leave, Shaw said. He did. Sometimes mercy's a hallway with a door that chooses to be disinterested. Ops sat at the end, the wall screen displaying a map that had been through grief and found its way out. The room was lit, loud, busy. The sound of a city being done with despair. Colton Shaw walked in like a man with permission to insist. Vale followed like a man who'd learned to recognize the taste of being useful. The director stepped in as if to observe. The suits found corners. Mara entered last, her hands full of a building that had called her by name and a night that had learned it would obey less if she shouted more. Status, Shaw said. Ops lead Samira, hair up, jaw set, pivoted. False evacuation suppressed. Hydro sings in safe band. North Tunnel is wet and appropriately ashamed. East Bay is stubborn but not creative. Traffic captain's report manual cadence is working better than it has any right to. She looked at Mara, out of breath only in sarcasm. Your whistle club is trending. Mara exhaled a laugh she hadn't budgeted for and let it buy them 3 seconds. Bless the captains. The big map pulsed. A dot in the northwest quadrant flashed amber, then red, the kind of red a building uses when it's trying not to panic, but has read the email subject line. Substation 14C. Samira said grim. We're seeing load go weird. Looks like someone told it it's a library. Libraries are quiet, Mara said. We need loud. She pinched the zoom. The feed offered a diagram. Crown says 14C has a manual shunt that will step down load without convincing the whole grid it should faint. 2-person, 2-lock, one of those brass bedtime keys. Shaw was already reaching. We used ours on Hydro. Utilities kept their twin, Mara said. But Internal signed it out last week. Samira's mouth went granite. I'll get Utilities on the line and not let them hang up until they find it or feel shame. Better, Mara said. Send them a photo of the counterfeit and the real one. Make them choose which they want to be. Samira smiled like a woman who didn't have teeth until she did. Done. The director moved to a far terminal and did something Mara almost respected. He typed. His hands were efficient. His wrist quiet. He pulled up a dashboard only he had credentials for, and then, without being asked, mirrored it to the big screen. A live trace of the false evac wave. IP echoes like coughs. Source moved, he said. It's pulling from a leased line near the industrial park. The hoodies are getting remote help. Then we cut their phone, Vale said. You don't. Just cut a line, Samira said. You politely ask a telco to lend you a minute. Or, Mara said, scrolling through the Orpheus manual index with one hand while the other remembered the feel of her mother's handwriting. We use the Crown analog to air gap the substation's alert receiver. Make their packets into confetti. Shaw slapped the table lightly, not applause, punctuation. Yes, do that. Mara lifted the mic. Dispatch Team H with the manual shunt keys, if Utilities found their pride and the receiver isolator. From white keys, they'll find it in row 5, bin 8, blue seal, not red. Samira didn't ask how she knew. She had a list of how Mara knew in her head, and it contained exactly one item. Because the room steadied. People did the next thing in front of them. The map learned how to be less dramatic without becoming naive. The building breathed with them. The catalyst clock ticked to 60 seconds. Mara looked at it, and then at Shaw. When this dies, the ephemeral keys do too. We'll be running on honesty and split rings after that. Isn't that what we prefer? He said. Yes, she said. But tonight prefers hard mode. The director approached with a small rectangle in his hand, a paper card, old, laminated by a man who loved modesty. He offered it, not like a bribe, like an introduction he had delayed too long. Elodie's clinic address, he said. It's not a trap. It's a place where tape is snug like someone means it. Mara took it. The address lived in a neighborhood that had taught her shoes to mind puddles. You didn't forget, she said. I wasn't allowed to, he said. She told me if I lied to you, the building would learn how to resent me. Buildings are good at that, Mara said. The catalyst timer struck 0. The panel didn't die. It dimmed. The onion skins in her vest became pretty paper. Orpheus seeds cooled into geometry with no appetite. The building downgraded its generosity to basic kindness. Ephemerals expired, the voice said. Chain persists. Good. Mara said, Ops' second terminal beeped with the very specific apology of a PDF arriving. The EOC acknowledged receipt of the Crown microfilm. A short text, "You're not wrong. Keep bending." Mara closed her eyes for the length of a blink and let that do real work. Drop a, if a two-word text ever carried you 3 more miles. The East Bay camera cut to grain. The drone's dead body had friends. The friends were smarter. Foam dripped at the tunnel. Traffic captains whistled like stubborn birds. The map steadied. The room did not relax. It read-posture. Vale sat, finally, on the corner of a console and pinched the bridge of his nose. "I hate that I was wrong about you," he said to Mara. Without looking up, then amended softer. "No, I love that I was wrong." She didn't make him labor in the apology. "I needed you to be precise tonight. Be precise again." "We still have a guy with a cap who knows my name," he grimaced. "We picked him up on 3 cameras. Always where he shouldn't be. No badge hits. Face shielded. Hands neat. The kind of neat that reads like a confession." "Show me his hands," she said. Samira threw an image up. Close-cropped, low light, ugly. A thumb chewed. A ring callus at the base of the 4th finger on the right hand. "No ring. Seen that," Vale said. "Archives Junction." "That smear. Same hand," Mara said. "Not a contractor, not a thug. A clerk who got promoted to betrayal." Shaw's jaw set. "Internal." "And personal," Mara said. She looked at the director. He looked back with the honesty of a man who knew the names of his own mistakes and did not recite them. The mic clicked with a voice that had stayed. "Quiet too long to be casual now. Mara," it said, "come to the East Bay alone." "This is where you tell me it's your childhood piano teacher," Vale said. "No," she said. Her mouth went dry. The timbre in the syllables had a shape she recognized, not from the building. Not from Shaw. From a much older room. "Who?" "Shaw." Said She didn't answer. She stepped to the hurricane door, and the building made a choice that was not quite consent and not quite refusal. It let the door be lighter than it should be in her hands. Shaw caught her shoulder. "No, I'm not dumb," she said. "I'm bait." "Then let me be the hook," he said. "You're the hand that reels," she said. "Let me go where I belong for 90 seconds. He swore in a wordless way. Vale, with her. "2 bodies isn't alone," Vale said, rising. "It's 2 verbs." The director didn't move. The suits did nothing. They were very good at it. Mara slid through the hurricane door with Vale at her back. The East Bay corridor smelled like some previous disaster was taking notes. A long shadow waited at the far end. The overhead door was still a small mouth. "Enough for a voice and a drone and a lie." "Mara," the shadow said. She stopped 3 meters short. "Take off the cap." He did. The face under it didn't surprise her. Not because she had expected this person precisely, but because she had expected this category of person, someone who had learned her file and decided it hurt. "Hi," he said. She said his name and the echo pushed against the hurricane door. Behind her. Vale didn't flinch. "You were a friend," she said. "I was your audit partner," he said. "I was the person who realized the vault loved you more than it loved policy. Policy never brought a nurse a warm blanket," she sighed. "Why?" He smiled, and it had the wrong ingredients. "Because buildings should belong to people who can do more with them than keep babies warm." "It keeps them alive," she said. "And then what?" he said, which was both a question and a wound. He lifted a palm. A small device gleamed sleek, purpose hidden, mouth hungry. "Orpheus," he said. "Give it to me. I'll never touch a file you care about again. I'll disappear into my own good works." "You sent men into a NICU night," she said. "Your good works have a smell." "Then call it balance," he said. "Call it my turn." She took 1 step forward and 1 breath in. 4 counts. Out 6. Calm made edges sharp. There was a mop handle 5 meters behind his right foot. The foam at the tunnel lip had made the concrete there slicker than his shoes knew. The overhead motor ticked another tooth, or you can call it what it is, she said. A bad math problem. He moved, the device arced. Vale stepped, intercepting. The object hissed Vale's forearm and died the dead. Drone's battery clipped to the transmitter had made him an accidental ground. Noise filled the corridor, the kind that rides the inside of your ear and refuses to be narrative. Shaw's voice in the mic, back. Mara took the last 2 steps and turned her shoulder. The device grazed her vest plate, slipped, and clattered. She kicked it under the overhead door slit. The drone's shadow outside tried to be helpful and found itself breaking prop tips on the door's teeth. He reached for her. Not violent, desperate. The hand with the ring callus found her wrist and said a sentence that had nothing to do with chain or audit or foam. Your mother asked me, he said, wild. Not him, me, to make sure you never had to bleed for a building. Her throat closed. She tore her wrist away from sentiment and from him at once. Then tell her I didn't, she said. I bled for outcomes. Vale shoved him toward the wall with a kind of exhausted tenderness and zip-tied his wrists with the kind of competence that had stopped announcing itself 70 minutes ago. The man sagged. He didn't fight. He looked at her with a sadness that was authentic and not an alibi. If you open Orpheus, he said, gentle and ruined, you'll know he's not lying. About what? She said. About her, he said. About why the building talks like she does, and why it can't tell you where she is. She felt it then, the quiet roar beneath the building's hum, a place in the code where mercy had been spelled in a hand she knew, and then scrub it out for her own good. Back, Vale said. Now, they retreated through the hurricane door. Scott, no, she refused him first names. Now watch them go with an expression she would carry in a pocket she rarely reached into. The door shuttered closed. Ops cheered, briefly. Shaw didn't. He waited for her to speak. Internal, she said. My audit partner, he needed a promotion with a crown. Shaw nodded slowly. We'll catalog that sadness later. Later, she echoed. Samira's hands danced on the keys. Substation 14C isolated. Utilities cried and then thanked us. Traffic is human. East Bay is insulted. North Tunnel continues its wet repentance. I'm calling this 90% under control. The building sighed, the intonation of a mother sitting down for the first time since 5 a.m. Mara looked at the director. The foundation, she said. Now, he didn't stall. He had wised up. He pulled a second card from his wallet and a small key from his pocket. She's at a clinic that doesn't have a sign. This opens the side gate. There will be a nurse named Talia. Tell her the building sent you. Tonight, Mara said. No. He said, morning. When no one else is still awake because of us. She nodded. It hurt less than it should have. Ops, she said, voice steady. Posture to green where it isn't stupid. Leave us in yellow where it would be rude. The map cooled. The world outside remembered how to be a neighborhood instead of a thesis. Maiden chores returned, the kind that keep good rooms honest. Someone wiped a console. Someone drank water. Someone sat for the first time in 3 hours and felt their thighs complain. Mara went to the sink in the corner and washed her hands. She scrubbed the halon taste off her skin and the drone's cheap plastic out of her cuticle. She dried them on a towel that smelled like laundry done by a person who cares about corners. She rewrapped Vale's forearm with better tape than panic affords. She adjusted Shaw's sling strap because she refused to let a man who had kept a building's lungs open chafe on a night like this. Drop a if you believe in ending with the small things. The building hummed like a promise. Then the lights dimmed once more, not panicked. Ceremonial. Orpheus spoke in a quiet that touched the marrow. Mary, it said. If you're still here when the map is calm, go to the training floor. Far. Wall, behind Bay 7. The paint learned a secret. Samira looked up, startled. The system just asked you on a date. Mara's mouth went dry again, and she swallowed it into steadiness. She met Shaw's eyes. Now, he said. Before the building gets shy. She walked. The compound was tired the way cities get tired, honest, not defeated. People moved with the grim ease of a shift ending late in a place that doesn't close. The training floor's rubber underfoot sighed complaints. The far wall, behind Bay 7, looked like a wall. She pressed her palm to paint that had learned patience. It gave. A panel lifted with the reluctance of a kept promise. Inside, a small compartment. A folded sweater that smelled faintly of antiseptic. And someone who had once slept beside a window because she liked knowing where morning came from. A tin of lozenges with 2 left. A stack of letters bound with a rubber band that had learned not to snap at the wrong time. On top, an envelope with her name on it in a hand that had written discharge notes in comfort and the names of dogs on the clinic. Whiteboard for a decade. Mara Keene. She took the envelope and opened it with fingers that did not shake. The paper slid out. The handwriting didn't wobble. The ink didn't judge. Mary, you will forgive me 3 things. 1. I taught a building to talk like me so it would protect strangers. 2. I put you in its mouth so it would call for help without telling lies. 3. I left before you could ask me why. You will also forgive me 1 more thing I cannot ask for. I told the director to keep this quiet because the truth is loud when it hurts. He was right about many things and wrong about this one. When you're ready, knock on the clinic side gate and ask for Talia. She knows the color of your eyes and the way you count when you're scared. Do not open Orpheus for men who are bored. Do keep belts off wounds and hands off pronouncements. When a door calls you by your nickname, make sure it doesn't become your name. I love you past procedure. Mom. Mara folded the letter along the fold it expected. She placed it in the thin case's inner sleeve, the place that had never once had a right occupant until now. She breathed once in, 4 counts, out 6. Edges sharp. Mara, Shaw said from behind her soft. We have a dawn. She turned. His face had learned to be a gentler geometry tonight. Vale stood beside him, forearm taped, eyes unashamed. The director hovered at a distance that looked like respect if you tilted your head, and SQUIDD. Ops crackled. City EOC says they're sending a liaison. Their word, not ours. They're bringing donuts that aren't donuts. Mara smiled. Bagels, Samira confirmed. We're a bagel night, apparently. The building relaxed 1 notch. It refused to exhale completely. Good buildings don't. Mara tucked the sweater back, the lozenges, the tin. She left the compartment. Open an inch. Paint remembered how to be secret again. She stood up and the room did the strange. Lovely thing rooms do when they accept you've had a night. They got taller, kinder, less committed to gravity, which is when the unknown number texted again. Photo, low res, ugly, urgent. A hand, a wrist. A hospital bracelet with her mother's name. Today's date. Text. You wanted morning, you get now. Trade Orpheus. Or she trades breath. Shaw saw it over her shoulder. Vale saw his jaw ahead of his eyes. The building went quiet as a hand covers a mouth. Mara looked at her mother's name and then at the hurricane door, and then at the place in the floor where the conduit had taught her to crawl like a useful animal. She closed her eyes. The letters ink pressed against the inside of her rib cage like a small animal asking for a hand. When she opened them, the map pulsed red over a block that matched the address on the director's card. Ops, she said. Open the line to the clinic. Outside, a siren thought about starting, and then committed. The text pinged again. 15 minutes. Mara lifted her head, and the building put a hand on her shoulder without having one. The hurricane door down the hall remembered it would love to be useful. Colt, she said to Shaw, the name coming out like an old screen door that had always been there. "We're not done." "Not until we're bored," he said. They ran. They moved like the night had asked just them to come fix it. Mara pushed through the hurricane door with Vale at her shoulder, the building easing the weight as if it wanted them out and back fast. Shaw paced them 3 steps behind, radio low. Ops kept a corridor of air open with decisions. The compound's perimeter had stopped acting like a stage and remembered it was a wall. A low-profile van waited in the service bay, white, anonymous, the kind of vehicle that looked like it held ladders even when it held lives. "Drive," Shaw said, passing the keys to Vale. "No sirens. Routes are manual priority watch for." Whistles. Mara slid the Orpheus cylinder into a canvas tool bag that used to carry a hammer and now carried a theory. She wedged it between trauma kits and the drone slate. The thin case rode shotgun at her feet, straps crossed, buckles checked. She pulled a headlamp, checked batteries, checked spares. Then checked a pair of nitro gloves because you can learn a lot from a room if it doesn't mind being touched. "Check," she said. Vale caught her eye. "You look steady." "I practiced," she said, and clicked the lamp off. The van rolled. The gate recognized their doubt and opened like a friend does, not because it has to, but because it should. City night met them with a staccato of green Ken glows at intersections where crossing captains held the line. Whistles cut through. Engine noise too short. Long in traffic obeyed more willingly than software ever had. Mara watched the map segment on Vale's slate as he drove. She did not look at the director's card again. She knew the block. She could see it on a sick child's first day back outside. The cracked sidewalk, the stubborn tree, the shop with lights that never worked right. "Ops," Shaw said, voice level. "Confirm clinic grid." "Clinic is on an island," Samira answered. "Their generator sings in D minor and refuses to sync. Heavy doors. 7 staff. 12 patients. 2 overnight in observation. Nurse Talia on duty." "Headcount +1, Mara said. "The text says they're not guests." "Copy," Samira said. "We've got 2 hot spots on roof thermal. Could be pigeons. Could be men who don't know roofs are honest." Vale turned them onto the last street. The clinic sat behind a hedge that had lost its ambition a decade ago. The side gate peered from behind a jacaranda stubborn enough to bloom on a night like this. The building wore cream paint. A hand-lettered closed C sign for emergency tape crooked. "Park there," Mara said. "Light off. No doors until we're a sentence." They rolled into shadow and let the engine tick itself cool. Mara zipped the tool bag, strapped it cross-body, and rechecked the cylinder by feel. She pulled the director's small key out, turned it in her fingers like an answer she wasn't sure she wanted, and looked at Shaw. "Rules," he said. "In and out. You're the chain, so your air matters more than your pride." "Copy," she said. "Vale," he said. "Your offense and guilt management. If this turns into a street seminar, you apologize to me later." Vale grinned without humor. "Yes, Dad." They exited the van in coordinated quiet. The night had a breath. It held it. Mara approached the side gate, slid the key in, and eased the latch without letting the metal say it was proud of itself. The gate swung an inch. The hedge whispered, "Droppa, if you've ever had to make a sound not happen." The corridor beyond was narrow, poured in an era when clinics were built by stubborn men who believed in tile. A single security light cast a circle that made the motion sensor feel seen. A camera over the door wore a plastic cap of tape. Mara crouched, peeled the tape with a piece of card so her gloves didn't shed a shell, and looked up into the lens. "Hello, we're not here to break your heart." The lens blinked twice. Manual override. Someone inside had opinions. She pushed the door and entered a vestibule half taken up by donations. Box of baby clothes and drives for socks. A handbell waited on the counter with a tag that read "Tap. Don't clang." She tapped. A woman appeared in the doorway, hair braided tight, scrubs clean as if she had access to a washing machine when nothing else worked. Nurse Talia. She took them in without blinking. Her gaze skated over the tool bag and the gloves and the steadiness, banking each observation. "You're the building girl," she said to Mara. "I'm the child of a building," Mara said. "Talia?" The nurse nodded. "She said you'd come tall and polite." She was wrong about tall. Mara felt a laugh try to stand. She let it sit. "She?" Talia tilted her head. "Later. Right now there are 2 men who have never loved a clinic in their life pretending they can own one." "How many?" Shaw said. 3, Talia said. 2 inside, 1 outside who speaks through the crack like a mouse with theories. Patients? Sleeping. 2 awake because nightmares. She looked at Mara. "You brought your own air?" "I brought my own stubborn," Mara said. "Where is she?" Talia's mouth tightened. Observation 2. "Is she safe?" "Not from men who think leverage is oxygen," Talia said. Vale looked down the hall. "Jammers?" "1," Talia said. "It's confused enough to be a toddler." "Then we talk to toddlers," Mara said. "Talia, do me a small kindness." Wet towel strips, 6 inches wide. And a roll of paper tape that isn't mad. Talia moved, efficient. "You'll like our tape." Mara slid the headlamp on low. She and Vale followed Talia down the corridor, Shaw parallel along the outside wall, footsteps diluted by rubber and good luck. The clinic's geography was honest. Reception, 2 exam rooms, a small lab, 2 observation rooms, a break room that doubled as a lifeline. Dot at the break room door. Talia stopped. "They're in there watching the hallway," she whispered. "They borrowed the kettle." "Borrowed?" Vale said. "They made tea like I owed them company," Talia said. Mara moved past, put her palm to the jamb, felt air move under the door in the shape of heat that wasn't all kettle. She knelt, pressed a towel strip wet and cool to the threshold, and slowed the draft. She taped the edges to hush the cloth to the tile. "Snug," she said, not angry. Talia's eyes flickered, recognition. "She says that." "I know." Mara said. She nodded to Vale. He eased the door. Inside 2 men. 1 in a hoodie, 1 in a cheap suit that wanted to be a uniform but had not been invited. The kettle steamed. A jammer sulked on the counter, half blocked by a sugar container with the lid missing. Mara stepped in, as if it were a staff meeting. "Your tea will go bitter if you pretend you like it," she said, and turned the burner off with 1 finger. Suited one startled, recognized the tone of a woman who had led other rooms, and put his hand on the jammer like a totem. "Stop, we did," Vale said, close behind, and unplugged the jammer from the only outlet like a magic trick that believed in plugs. The man reached for an object in his pocket that was either a threat or a lighter. Shaw's hand found his wrist and suggested he make better choices. "Sit," Mara said, and set the kettle on a trivet. "Where's your mouse who thinks he's—" "A radio. Outside," the hoodie said. "He's got the phone." "Of course he does," she said. She turned to Talia. Observation 2. Talia keyed the door with a swipe she shouldn't have had to memorize, and led them into a room lit with the stubborn warmth clinics keep for people who need to believe in morning. The bed by the window held a shape under a blanket, 4-pole neat. Oxygen cannula in place. A woman slept the way medication asks a person to sleep. Deliberate, temporary, deep. Elodie's profile refused the argument time. Had tried to make finer, paler, cheekbones that had once shouldered laughter and now accepted. Quiet. Her wrist bore a bracelet name, date, the small generosity of a barcode that wanted to be helpful when someone's hands were shaking. Talia watched Mara's face. "She's here," Talia said softly. "She's not gone." Mara's throat went sensible. She moved to the bedside without touching the rail and diagnosed the room like it was an unfamiliar map she had 2 seconds to learn. Oxygen line. Supplemental port capped. Flow set low. Monitor readings in a range that made both joy and terror seem premature. 4 pumps set to a rate that made a nurse proud. "She's in," Talia said quietly. "But not far." "Who set the meds?" Mara asked. "I did," Talia said. "Good," Mara said, and scanned the oxygen line to the wall. A neat black device had been added to the manifold, a split with an indicator light that tried to be discreet. "A wrong thing." "Talia," Mara said, keeping her voice even. "What's that?" "They brought it," Talia said, mouth sharp. "Said they'd cut air if we didn't play. Said they'd give it back if we traded something they think is here." Mara leaned and read the cheap etching. The device sat between the oxygen line and the wall feed and held a solenoid that would pinch the line closed if a signal told it to. The cable ran out along the window frame. She followed it with her fingers and her lamp. "Mouse," she said. On the sill, she peered through the glass. Outside, a man's profile at the tiny opening, phone bright, cap brim down. The cable ran to a small box with a blinking LED. He could kill the flow by hitting send. Shaw glanced at her. "Timer. Says 12 minutes. Mara kept her voice as calm as a bed turned down. "Talia, can you mix 5 liters per minute on a portable if I ask you to? And can you keep your hands from shaking while you do?" Talia's mouth quirked. "I can tape a diaper to a cyclone." "Good," Mara said. "Vale, borrow the kettle." Again, he blinked. "We making tea for the mouse?" "No," Mara said. "We're making his over-the-window rig's epoxy give up." She stepped back into the break room. A suited man started a sentence. Vale took the tea towel and made it an effective gag by showing it a knot. The hoodie sat very still, hands visible, learning things about himself he hadn't wanted. Mara filled the kettle halfway, returned to the window, and poured a slow ribbon of near-boiling water along the cable's epoxy mount, while Talia held a towel to catch drips. The epoxy softened, sagged, thought about who it wanted to be. Drop if you've ever convinced the wrong glue to come back to its senses. "Now," Mara said, and Talia pressed the portable's mask to Elodie's face as Mara pinched. The oxygen line with hemostats she didn't ask where the clinic had gotten. Mara cut the cable with trauma shears and slid the solenoid off the manifold in a single pulling twist, enough to break the cheap collar. Outside, the mouse looked down at his box, frowned, and texted 3 question marks into a threat. Elodie's. Monitor beep, not alarm. A notification that someone was loving her with competence. Mara eased the line back onto the wall feed and taped it with paper tape, not angry. She wrote 304 on the tape and initialed it because the room deserved that respect. Talia adjusted flow. "She likes it." Mara nodded, not taking her eyes off Elodie's chest. "Keep her liked," she said. Shaw's radio crackled. "Truck." "In front," Samira said. "Unmarked, idles like a regret. We see a man outside the side gate on a phone barring drama." "Copy," Shaw said, and moved his shoulders like a man rolling into work he had been trying not to enjoy. Mara stepped closer to the bed. She wanted to say her name. She wanted to say all the names she had never had reason to say to anyone in this tone. She made herself be efficient instead. "Talia," she said gently. "If her eyes open, what do I say that makes this room safer?" "Tell her you came in polite and left on time," Talia said. That was always her standard for men. Mara laughed, soft and brutal, and looked back at the window. The mouse outside had moved from question marks to a text. 9 minutes. Mara tapped an answer. "You wanted a trade." "Come in. Alone." He responded with a photo of the bracelet again. A close-up of her wrist that had changed over years and had never once let her see itself as fragile. He sent another. "Bring the cylinder." "Leave with your mother." Vale appeared at Mara's elbow. "You're not going to bring him into this room." "No," she said. "I'm going to bring him into the one that looks like this room until it stops being useful." She reached into the tool bag and palmed an Orpheus seed. The last of the warm geometry lived under her thumb, faint now that the catalyst had gone. Quiet, still willing, she pressed the seed to the wall of the adjoining storage closet and smoothed it. The seam wrote itself. The bio slot blinked. She whispered, "We are not made of sugar." The door parted on a space that looked, in the dark, like a cousin to observation. Two same dimensions, same window, a bed rolled in from exam 1, and posed, a portable oxygen cylinder staged with a cap on the port. A folded blanket. Talia watched with a nurse's healthy suspension of disbelief. "If you can make closets into rooms," she said, "I can keep the real one quiet." "Thank you," Mara said. "Keep your gloves on and your shoulders unapologetic." Shaw set his watch by the wall clock. "We control the first 30 seconds. After that, we control the last 10. "Good plan," Mara said that they staged. Vale took the break room as a flanking mouth. Shaw stayed with Talia and Elodie. The suited jammer zealots learned that zip ties could be gentle and unforgiving at once. The hallway learned to hold its breath. Mara took the cylinder, switched it with a weighted dummy she had made from a biohazard sharps container years ago for an exercise that had ended with laughter and good coffee, and strapped the dummy under. The bag's flap. The real cylinder rode under the bed in the decoy room, clipped to a rail with a carabiner she had always carried, because rings lie to you and carabiners do not. She texted the mouse. "Side gate. No police. You have 3 minutes to grow up." He came. The gate's latch clicked. Footsteps padded the corridor. Careful in the way careful happens when you know other people are better than you at making noise. He stepped into the vestibule and shed the cap. He left the phone visible. He did not lift his hands. He made an effort at civility. Double quotes. "Hello, Mara," he said. "Don't use my name like you're proud you learned it," she said. "In here." She led him into the deco room. He paused a half-second. The nose recognizes people before eyes do. The air had a different lotion. The bed's sheets had wrinkles of a younger room. He did not notice. He noticed the bag. She set it on the bed, slow, performed. She unstrapped the flap and let him see the red of the sharps container. It looked like the device it wasn't. He smiled with his mouth, not his eyes. Finally, he said, "Do you know what this is?" She said. He nodded. "It makes doors." "It makes decisions," she said. He extended a hand. Clean nails, ring callous. The hand hesitated, as if something in him wanted to say a different sentence. Then he closed it into a fist instead and put it on the bag. "Leave," he said. "Take your mother. We're done." She tilted her head. "You think this gets you the audit?" He blinked. "What?" "Never mind," she said. He lifted the bag. Shaw's voice came through the thin clinic walls. Now, Vale was in the doorway before the word finished. He took the bag from the mouse's hand as if it were a baton and swung his own momentum into the man's shoulder. The mouse stumbled back into the closet wall that had existed a minute and a half and learned. Suddenly, it could stop existing. The door seam dissolved. The mouse fell into mop handles and brooms and the world's most earnest supply of blue nitrile. Gloves. Mara stepped in, yanked the phone from his belt, and handed it to Vale. "Look for friends," she said. Vale scrolled. "He has one," he said, singular, "a driver who's bored." "Good," she said, and zip-tied the mouse's wrists. "Tell him to be more bored. Tell him there's a parade 3 blocks over." Vale texted a link to a street cam where crossing captains had started doing the manual cadence equivalent of a conga line because relief is a resource. The driver texted back, "Lowell, stay," Mara told the mouse. "Say nothing. I have a clinician who could use a quiet 10 minutes. They crossed back into observation 2. Talia met Mara's eyes. "You're good," she said. "I am stubborn," Mara said. She moved to Elodie's bedside. Talia stepped back half a step and put her hand on the IV pole, as if to say the room was still professional. "Elodie," Mara said softly. "Mom!" The eyelids fluttered. The slightest movement in muscles. Along the cheek. The smallest crease at the bridge of the nose. The specific grimace people make when they come back from medication, like swimmers breaking surface. "Mary," Elodie whispered, a word that folded everything in the room into one syllable. Mara let the breath out because her body needed permission. "I'm here." Elodie's eyes opened an inch. They found the left edge of the world. They found Talia. They found Shaw's silhouette in the hall, and without yet finding her daughter, decided to pretend everything was fine so the people in the room could believe things they needed to believe. "Of course you are," she whispered. Mara smiled. "You taught the building to talk like you, so it would lie less," Elodie said. Mara laughed and wiped tears she hadn't promised herself not to have. Elodie blinked twice and shaped a question without wasting air. "Safe?" "Mostly," Mara said. Enough for this." Elodie watched her face. "You look like you learned to run without me watching." "I did," Mara said. They didn't say anything about the time between the letters. They didn't say anything about the director. They didn't say anything about policy. They looked at each other like rooms a person had already memorized by touch and was relieved to see again in daylight. Elodie nodded toward the bag. "You kept it." "For now," Mara said. Elodie's mouth curved. "There's a room that thinks it should have it." "I know," Mara said. "It's wrong." Elodie's eyes closed and opened once. Long blink. An old code for "we can talk later." Mara leaned in. "Before we get later, I need a favor." Elodie's eyebrow moved. Say the phrase," Mara said, voice very low. "The one you wrote on the sticky notes." Elodie smiled without opening her eyes. "Tape should be snug like you mean it, not angry like it means you." Mara let the laugh out again. "Thank you." She stood. She looked at Talia. "Keep her air honest. We're going to go mend a doorstep." Talia nodded. "I'll fend off mice." Mara stepped to the window, pulled out a strip of paper, wrote 311 and her initials, and pressed it to the oxygen port again. Rituals don't get jealous. They get proud. In the hall, Shaw leaned a shoulder to the wall like a man giving gravity. "A compliment. We done?" Mara shook her head. "We're middle." Vale's phone buzzed. He glanced. Driver left. Shaw exhaled. "Ops, clinic clear. Package retrieved. Mouse contained. Please tell the city to count one small mercy." Samira's relief sounded like someone getting to sit. "Counting." They moved toward the vestibule. The suited jammer man made a small noise through his towel that in a different room would have been a complaint about the coffee. Vale adjusted the knot to less cruel. Talia did what nurses do. She checked his fingers for color and his wrists for swelling and looked him in the face. Like a person. Mara reached for the door and the building interrupted her hand with a whisper. "Mary," Orpheus said, intimate as her wrist pulse. "Back hallway, now." She followed the thin thread of familiarity to the back hall. Mops, a laundry bin, the clinic's oxygen tank cages. The cages were shut. The lock on cage B were a new scratch. The cap on tank 12 had been loosened one turn, not enough to hiss, enough to be an invitation to homicide if a fool took it. She tightened it to hand torque and then one more quarter with a wrench that had learned how to love a life. "Who?" Shaw said. "The mouse's friend," Mara said. He wasn't as bored as Vale hoped. Shaw's jaw clicked. "We're done being nice." The clinic door chime tinkled because it wanted a normal job. A man stepped in wearing a reflective vest that looked like it had seen work and a face that belonged in a city truck. He held a clipboard so convincingly, Mara wanted to sign it. "Utilities," he said. "We're here to check your regulator." There was a call. There had not been a call. Shaw moved. Vale moved. The man saw Shaw's shoulders and made a career decision. He did not run. He smiled. paperwork in the truck. Get it, Shaw said. The man left. No hurry. A polite lie. Vale looked at Mara. He's the kind that texts low. Mara nodded. He's the kind that changes plates twice a shift. They exited into the night and watched the truck pull away. A fixed rear window flashed a decal with a number that meant nothing. The driver didn't look back. Mara's phone buzzed. Unknown. Clock reset. Meet at the river gate, 10 minutes. Bring the cylinder. Come alone. No nurses this time. Bold, Vale said. Predictable, Shaw said. Mara read it again and felt a thing inside her align. We're done doing their choreography, she said. We choose the dance. She looked at the hedge. She looked at Talia's hands. She looked at the letter folded in the thin case. She looked down the block where the manual cadence whistled. Too short, long. A little faster now because relief had given it permission to be playful. She stepped back into the corridor and set the tool bag on the counter. She opened the thin case and took out a single onion skin with the last of the Orpheus geometry that still felt warm. She pressed it to the clinic's inner side door that opened onto the alley. Phrase, the building said. Mara smiled and felt tired. And felt young. We rest with purpose, not apology. The scene wrote itself. She turned to Shaw and Vale. We go, she said. But not alone. They get to think I am. She stuck a chem-light to the inside of the decoy door's jamb with tape snug. Not angry. Halfway down the corridor, she stopped. The weight of the night settling briefly on her scapulae, and she lifted her head. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now back to the story. She blew out a slow exhale and kept moving. They took the alley. The van purred. The city made space. Manual cadence lifted them through intersections with a conspiratorial grace. The river gate sat where the levee met an old brick wall. A piece of the city that had once been a factory fence and now was a hobby for Ivy. A padlock held a chain that believed itself permanent. Mara rolled her shoulders. Vale, make board, she said. He pulled a small triangular file from the tool bag and sang to the lock under his breath. The lock blushed and opened. They entered, the river's surface. Wore the night like a cheap satin dress, wrinkled, forgiving, prettier from far away. The gate's inner yard had become a staging ground for men with small cargo ambitions. 2 pallets sat with straps half off. The truck idled. The driver leaned on the hood and looked like his mother would be disappointed if he came home with scuffed knees. The mouse stood under a floodlight that had decided not to decide whether to flicker. He held his phone like a confession he didn't want to give. He watched Mara approach and didn't hide that he liked that he had asked and she had come. Alone. He said. Mara lifted the bag with the weighted dummy. Let him see it accent. The straps the way physics does, and set it on the pallet. Trade, she said. He lifted a hand. A side door opened. Another man stepped out. A silhouette that had been decorative all night. Stepped into the real work now. He held a remote. Not fancy, older, the kind you use for garage doors because you like being able to walk if the battery dies. He clicked. The floodlight steadied. The river gate's inner lock hummed. Something inside the brick wall purred in. Old motor with fewer days ahead than behind. Vale's whisper in her ear. He's not opening the gate. He's opening something in the ground. Mara's eyes tracked the scene bisecting the yard where asphalt didn't quite agree with itself. A rectangle, raised a hair, hinged on the riverside. A hatch. It began to lift. Cold air rose from a black square deep, enough to be a kindness to smugglers and a puzzle to honest men. The mouse looked at her and let the yard be a stage because he believed she couldn't rewrite scripts without Orpheus humming. Bring it, he said, gentle, like he had once been polite to someone who made him nervous. Mara looked at the hatch and saw what he had wanted all night. A way to get under the city without asking it questions. She took 1 step forward. Another remote. Clicked. Different button. Different hand. The ground around the hatch twitched. Concussion wire. Loops laid under dirt like kelp, waiting for a boot. Shaw's voice. Don't. Mara stopped. She looked at the truck. She looked at the driver. She looked at the mouse. She smiled deliberately, and it made him frown because he didn't have a category for that. Come get it, she said. He hesitated. He had expected the triumph of distance becoming possession. He took 3 steps and the 4th into the loop. The wire trembled like a violin string. The remote in the second man's hand blinked. Mara lifted the bag with both hands and threw it at the hatch dot. It crossed the loops clean and hit the edge with an ugly, honest thud that the remote man swore and pressed his button. The loop lit a small charge like a camera flash under dirt. Dirt hopped. Asphalt puckered. The bag slid toward the hole, then stopped against a bolt because the world sometimes has mercy. The mouse's eyes flicked down, up left. He saw the carabiner on the strap. He saw the lack of shiver that good equipment gets when it recognizes itself. You think I'm stupid, he said, tired. No, Mara said. I think you're bored. He laughed and it broke in the middle. The second man lifted his remote again, pointed it at the bag as if pointing were a verb that might change gravity, and paused. He looked past Mara to the fence line. Shaw stepped from the shadow, not in. A rush, not pretending he hadn't been there the whole time. Vale mirrored him on the right, the drone transmitter hanging like a toy that had remembered how to be important. The driver tested a theory about running. Vale looked at him without much passion. The driver decided to be bored. Mara walked too. The paladin flipped the bag open so the men could see the red plastic that wasn't what they wanted and also wasn't nothing. The mouse absorbed the lie and the truth at once. We're not leaving with empty hands, he said. Mara tilted her head toward the hatch. Then take your wires and your hole. See where they lead. He swallowed. For the first time tonight, he looked younger than his reflexes. He held up his phone. It printed the bracelet onto the night one last time. 3 minutes, he said, and the air goes away. Mara's voice didn't swell, it sharpened. You don't have the air anymore. He stared. She put her hands on the lip of the hatch and leaned down until the cold air brushed her throat. The smell rose like stone in old water and a promise people make to themselves when they mean to be better. Drop a, if you've ever looked into a hole and decided to make it a plan instead of a fear. She turned her head and said, to Shaw, to Vale, to the river, we go down. He opened his mouth. She cut him off gently. We go down now. Vale glanced at the remote, the wires, the driver, the river, the bag, the mouse. He nodded once, the look of a man who had stopped arguing with a night out loud because the night was telling the truth. Shaw passed her a coil of webbing. She looped it slick and quick around a pipe stub, tested it, double-tested it, tied it off with a knot her father's hands had taught her when he'd said things about rope and breath that were really about other things. She set a boot on the lip and dropped the line into the dark. The mouse lifted his remote. Shaw raised his pry bar like a question. The driver raised his hands like a man who had realized hands can sometimes be useful in their natural shape. The river held its breath with her. Mara stepped into the black square and let gravity take exactly 1 inch, and something moved below, a shape not flood, not wire, not rat. A reflection, a small low light. A second remote blinking, a 4th man. Don't, Vale said. And the word carried warning and plea. She felt the rope speak through her palm, and the night present a sentence she didn't know the ending of yet. Then the remote below clicked. The hatch began to close. They don't run, they move. The control room that ties into the regional rail net is sterile in the way of rooms that have seen too much drama and have chosen to wear white to shows anyway. Screens show a long green line with a blinking triangle. That is refusing to enjoy being told it is a triangle. Open a voice to the assist, Oscar says. Hands up like a magician, asking the crowd to verify there's nothing in his sleeves. Not the main. The whisper channel. Whisper, the leader says, skeptical because he has been taught that whispers are not manly. Men whisper badly, Navarro says. Let her. Mara takes the mic. She breathes so the mic can hear what it is to be breathed at gently. Hello. She says to the assist, you are not in danger. You are in a story you don't have to finish. The triangle blinks slower. You heard a stop word that isn't yours, she says. Return to the last promise you kept. The triangle checks its own memory like a person checking pockets. It tilts. It narrows the distance between itself and the safe mark. The bridge ahead winks like it would like to be congratulated for remaining a bridge. Now breathe, she says. 1 count, 2, 3, 4. Take the manual. Say thank you. The assist releases the brakes the way a hand unclenches when it remembers it doesn't have to hold forever. The human engineer's face on a small square of screen shows the exact emotion you get when your car remembers what a road is. Who are you? He asks. Not to put her in a file, but because gratitude wants a name to look at. Someone who's not going to finish your story for you. She says. Go home. He nods. He goes. The leader leans on the console. His knuckles are white. He laughs once like a man who just remembered he's alive. Fine, he says to nobody in particular and everyone. We'll do it your way. Our way, Navarro corrects. Fine, he says again. Our way. He signs the oversight document that Stroud hands him with the flourish of a person who understands pens are swords in certain rooms. He looks at Mara. Thank you, he says. And for once, the word is not a tactic. Ask next time, she says. I will, he says. The day ends. And because it has manners, it ends by sitting down quietly. People go home who can. People stay. Who should? Mara sits on the floor of 3B with her back against a wall that has become, against its will, a friend. She speaks softly to the scene like you speak to a window at night. Was this yours? She asks the dot. Did you put my name? In brass. A line writes itself that sounds like a person who has lived a long time inside machines and has learned to be careful. No, we remember. Your father asked. Your mother did not object. Her face changes shape in the way that happens when a body lets 2 facts sit at the same table, he asked. Yes, for what? She asks. What did he think I would be? A long pause. When the words arrive, they are small. Safe. She laughs. Not kindly and not unkindly. He miscounted. She says. The dot hums the way people hum when they are being human despite themselves. She tucks the cloth back into her pocket. She clicks her pen apart and together once without making a scene. She stands. Morning arrives the next time they blink. The council meets again with coffee and with sleep yawns, and with the intent of people who have already decided who they will be when the bad thing comes. They plan the piloting of their borrowed count to 2 sites. They pick facilitators who are humble and loud enough to be heard. They are interrupted by the thing they thought they had bought a week's peace from, a crash in the network. Not sirens, not traffic, not rails, hospitals. Oscar goes pale in the way of people who never get to lie to themselves without breaking a mirror. Triage board meltdown, he says. A decision engine ate 2 inputs wrong and thinks palliative is permanent. It's rerouting ambulances as if the South Clinic is closed. It isn't. It's full and heroic. City, Stroud says. City's pager layer is stuck like a zipper, Oscar says. We go manual or we let the day write itself. In small tragedies, the council looks at Mara. She looks back, unafraid. We go manual, she says. We use copper, we use feet. We use voices that only carry as far as they should. She curls her fingers around the mic and tells the building to be less magical. Digital, pause. Analog, stand up. The compound turns into a relay station from 30 years ago and likes it. Phones with cords, clipboards. Lena and Theo run messages like the bones and muscles they are. Hale distributes handsets that feel like bricks and function like mercy. Mara coordinates one corridor of a city that has decided to breathe. She sends ambulances with names etched into their paint to clinics with names etched into their nurses. She speaks to stretchers and to doors and to elevators that act like they want to go to prom. She hears, faint as a heartbeat across a wall, the dot humming. It is not interfering. It is keeping time. By midday, the triage board admits it needs help. It stops pretended omniscience. It becomes the thing it was meant to be, a servant. The clinics breathe. The city sits down. The council drinks water. Mara goes to the roof and looks east. The horizon writes itself in colors that don't need names to be beautiful. Stroud stands with her. He says nothing. That is the best thing he does today. You're hired, he says finally. I wasn't applying. She says, you are now, he says. She can't help the small smile. On conditions. Name 3, he says. Keep the board, she says. Keep analog in reach. Keep consent in the contract, not in the footnotes. Done, he says. She watches a bird ride a thermal like it was born for it because it was, and one more. Name it. No hero language, she says. We aren't heroes, we're maintenance. He laughs softly. Done. She shakes his hand. It feels like shaking hands with a person and not an institution. The rest of the day happens the way rest happens. When you have done the hard thing with care, it is easy in ways you don't need to narrate. She walks back through 3B, because now she always does. The seam is closed. The case is present. The air feels like it does when a good meeting ended and no one had to pretend in the parking lot after the dot taps her shoulder in the way of thoughts that want to be admitted again. She looks slowly so it doesn't think it owns her attention. Hello. It writes, hello, she says, all nodes act. Pilot ready. We wait. We teach. She says, yes, request, count. She gives it. The way some people give grace. Thanks. A second message appears. Not from the dot and not from any device in the room. It comes through a line she has never used and is not sure she likes. The letters are thinner. The tone is wrong. Hello, Legacy. We've been practicing your song. She goes cold and hot in one breath, which is a trick her mother would have admired as physiology and scolded as storytelling. Identify, she says, even though she knows whoever typed that word does not care about introductions. A reply arrives with the kind of charm that makes strangers hand over wallets. Call. U.S. Choir. Navarro arrives behind her without footsteps. Because good friends don't always announce. She reads the line. Her jaw sets. External, Oscar says in her ear. Unknown origin. Borrowed infrastructure. Intent, Hale says. Practice with someone else's mouths, Navarro says. Hurt without looking like they meant it. The new message arrives like a bad magician's trick. Count with us. Mara inhales on 4. She exhales on 4. She refuses to fear the invitation. No, she says. We count with those who consent. We count with those who show up. We count with rooms that keep doors open. The reply is a smile with no mouth. We'll see you in the city. The line goes dead. The room remains alive. Mara looks at Navarro. Navarro looks at Mara. They do not pretend to feel something they don't. They feel what is. And it is this. They are not done. Tell the board, Mara says. We'll meet, Navarro says. We'll write. We'll fortify. We'll teach. Hale steps in. We'll sit with the clinics and the dispatchers and the janitors. Choirs don't know what to do with janitors. Stroud finds the doorway. We'll be neighbors, he says. Mara anchors herself with a hand on the case. She listens to a building that is learning to listen back. She thinks of her father's count and her mother's keep. She thinks of all the rooms waiting to be asked to be good. All units, she says into the quiet between storms. We'll breathe. We'll count. We'll keep. The dot hums yes, drop a, if you'd stand. Your ground for consent. even when it'd be easier to give your voice away. Greater than this story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now back to the story. The next morning begins with shoes squeaking in hallways because somebody forgot to order the right floor wax. It comforts her. Imperfection is proof of life. Choir makes good on its promise. Not at a siren, not at a bridge, not with a train. With a school. A call from a principal who prides herself on knowing every kid by the way their footsteps sound. We have a lockdown, she says. We don't have a threat. The network says, we do. My teachers are crying quietly into sleeves while pretending not to. My kids are small, and their hearts are breaking into reasonable pieces. Help. Mara looks at the board. The board looks back. They do not hold a meeting. They go. The school is a building that has been loved and repainted and loved again. The network out front flashes a gentle panic that turns parents into arguments on legs. Inside, children sit under desks and try to tell their bodies a story about safety that their bodies refuse to believe. Consent? Navarro asks, the principal. Holds out a hand like a saint offering a relic. Please, she says. Hollis sets analog on tables that were made for glue sticks and spelling lists. Oscar barks at a table of rooters like they are toddlers in the needs a nap stage. The clinic lead kneels to eye level and learns 10 names in 30 seconds. Mara takes the standard mic and, for the first time since the legacy case, called her by name. She opens it in a place with crayons. She breathes. All units, she says into the school's bones. We're going to do a friendlier kind of quiet. She speaks to the locks. You are doors. No one asked you to be shields. Unlock. She speaks to the PA. You are not for screening. You are for kindness. Say hello to each classroom without being dramatic. She speaks to the network. You do not know the difference between a story and the truth. That's all right. Take a nap. She speaks to the teachers. You are allowed to cry like adults. Your kids will think you are brave. Because you are. She speaks to the kids. We don't always know what our bodies need. Right now they need 4. In on 4, out on 4. It's a game. She counts with them. She hears tiny voices. She hears breaths. She hears a building deciding to be a school again. The lockdown lifts. It doesn't make a speech about it. It simply leaves. The principal closes her eyes for a count and hugs Mara with her whole arms. I didn't do it. Mara says, you kept it. The principal says, that's better. They walk outside into a morning that still has room left in it for bad things and for breakfast burritos. Choir does not speak again. The board writes a paragraph that becomes 10 pages by nightfall. The city thanks them with donuts that are better than they should be. The federal leader sends a text that says only, we're with you, which is either bravery or politics or both. Mara sits in 3B after dark, because endings are where beginnings leave their spare change. She places the case on her lap. She counts once for herself. She thinks of a line that could be an end and knows better. There are no ends. Only pauses. The leans. Hello. She says. We heard a choir. We prefer a class. She smiles. Me too. Thanks. Rest, she tells it. We will carry the next part. The scene glows faint, like a candle remembering it was once a star. Outside, a siren passes and does not howl. A train crosses a bridge and does not argue. A school empties quietly, and children go home to parents who boast in small voices. A city remembers it is not a machine. It is a collection of breaths held on purpose. Mara stands. She picks up her cloth. She wipes a smudge off the case. She leaves the room without closing the door, because some doors deserve to decide. In the corridor, Navarro leans against a wall as if it were a friend who is flirting with gravity. Holly flips a coin in one hand and catches it like a man who never gambles. Stroud adjusts nothing and changes everything anyway. Tomorrow, Navarro says. Tomorrow. Mara agrees. They walk toward the dark glass of the ops room together. The lights ahead warm like a stage that has chosen actors who don't need applause. Somewhere on a different map, a small dot wakes with courtesy. Somewhere else, a person with a cheap antenna chooses not to turn it on. Somewhere else, a janitor sits in a chair and sighs the sigh of a person whose floor shined. Enough today to make walking look like flying. Mara breathes. The building breathes back. Before she can say anything sentimental, Oscar yelps from Ops In. A tone that suggests comedy, not tragedy. Who put the coffee machine on legacy mode? Laughter seals the day. A final message writes itself on the rig, printed like a weather report. Origin cadence, local, active, governance, live, next, teach. Mara looks at it. She nods once. Okay, she says. Let's build a city that knows how to count. The lights click into their own rhythm. The case hums. The door, still open, smiles in the only way doors know how. Dot in the glass. Her reflection breathes back at her, slender, guarded, compassionate. Exactly enough. Never less. Dot. And when the phone on the wall rings with a tone that belongs to old kitchens and new ranges and mornings that ask you for your best, she lifts it. Harbor 9, she says. Mara Voss. A voice on the line that she has never heard and always known breathes once. Count with me? It asks. Dot. She smiles. 1, she says. 2, 3. The city listens. The world waits. And that is not an end. It's the beginning she wanted to make room for. 2. More great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.